And there goes my alarm clock. I was just waiting for that. Welcome, everybody, to another Zoom session. This is a topic which actually came about 2 weeks ago that I was in a discussion with 6 other callers, 3 new and 3 more experienced callers. And in an hour and a half, I think we spent about 45 minutes trying to figure out what the other person was saying to try and figure out where they were or what it was they were talking about. And then last week, Yolanda and I had a discussion along the same lines. And I thought, you know what? The way we communicate with each other is an issue. It's still an issue. So let's put this to rest and let's talk about the actual topic itself. And that is how callers communicate. So let me just pull this up here. Come on. Present. There we go. I believe you should be able to see my screen now. Yes?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. Now, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat or interrupt because I won't be able to see you while I'm presenting. I'm having a few computer issues, so bear with me. So when we talk about communicate, well, let's keep it simple. The names that we use as callers are all about one thing, and that's communication. And without communication, we don't have the key aspect of understanding, which is knowing what the other person means with what they say. Communication is that clear and understood. When we talk to dancers, we make ourselves very clear. So it's extremely important. That's why we as callers spend so much time making sure what we say and how we say it is correct. And we do that all the time with dancers. However, when we talk to other callers, especially about choreography, or when we mentor other callers, that communication often has as much variety and different terminology as there are callers in the discussion. So the basic terminology for callers, of course, to communicate is related to understanding 2 things: where we're starting from and what we do from there. And the first is the key to communication, because in order to discuss choreography, which is what we do most of the time, we have to have a common point of reference, or the rest of it just doesn't make sense. The most common that everyone relates to today is called FASR, of course, formation, arrangement, sequence, relationship. And in today's choreography, this has also been around for a lot, but it's coming more to the fore, are the other 3 letters, which is E, O, and a small o, which is exact, orientation, and occupation. So some of you may be familiar with that, some of you may not, but let's put everybody into the same mindset by having a very, very quick review of what it is that we're actually talking about. We know that FASR means where everybody is, but while we all use it, we use a wide-ranging area of confusing set of descriptions of how we're going to express that. For newer callers, this can be frustrating and sometimes ridiculous. And that's why I've got that up there for FASR, frustrating and sometimes ridiculous. Just in this group, if I said if I have a B1C and I want it to become a B2R after a chicken plucker, a few of you might know what I'm talking about. Or a 0 box becomes an across the street box after a chicken plucker. And a lead right becomes, et cetera, et cetera. A box 1-4 becomes a box 3-3 after a chicken plucker, or a box 3-4 after a chicken plucker, I should say. Or an Alaman left box becomes an oops, wrong corner box after a chicken plucker. Still others will see it as a head square through box becomes a head star through pass through box after chicken plucker. New callers today will see it as a corner box and becomes a right hand lady box after a chicken plucker. I think you get the idea here. But nevertheless, what they're all doing and what we're all doing as callers is trying to desperately communicate the same message. And the reality is, which is right and which is wrong? Well, the reality is they're all right and they're all wrong at the same time. When they're right, it's when the communication is clear. And when they're wrong, means it doesn't matter what terminology you're using. If the person you're talking to doesn't understand it, you've used the wrong terminology to express yourself. So to understand that, let's look at FASR, what it means, because we've only looked at this hundreds of times. It's well documented. And because of that, I'm going to do a quick overview, but understanding why it's expressed the way it is what's the key to this session. So we'll start with formation. Formation is if you picture the dancers on a grid or on a floor, the dancers are each a spot. And the formation is the pattern of those spots on the floor for the dancers, and they're facing direction at each spot. This includes things like lines, columns, tidal waves, squared sets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we know most of that. The number of formations you can get, hundreds, probably more. I don't even know them. But there's really maybe 24 that are common at mainstream and plus, and the rest are generally usually spots of transition that are almost impossible to describe, very confusing to understand. And the secret to getting past that, don't try, because they're not important. Most of those are transition formations that take you from one place to another through this formation. And unless you're really, really seriously going to talk about choreography from a very specific fixed setup or a fixed formation with everybody in a specific place, you're not going to worry about it. So don't try. Get your basic ones down. After that, find a better way to explain it. The next, of course, is arrangement. Arrangement is the positions within the formation that are occupied by the boys and which ones are occupied by the girls. And we all know there's only 6 possible arrangements. Okay, they are referred to as a 0, which means boy on the left, girl on the right, a 5 or a 0.5 or a half. In other words, everybody's half sashayed. 1, boys are on the outside, girls are in the middle. 2, girls are on the outside, boys are in the middle. 3, one couple standard, and on the outside, the other couple's half sashayed on the inside. And number 4 is vice versa. There are no other arrangements. And you see these numbers popping in and out every now and then, or you see different kinds of annotations that we have. Generally, when we talk ocean waves, we talk boy, girl, boy, but we're actually expressing the same things. And that's where it really keeps getting confusion, because everybody asks the question, who's your partner in an ocean wave? We've had that discussion many, many times. If you're not doing anything, rear back, you can see where the formation is, but it makes no sense depending on the next call. When we talk sequence, sequence is the order the dancers going around the formation counterclockwise. I was going that way, but I should be going, I was going this way, but I should be going this way. How do I explain this? When all the dancers are near their partner, describe whether or not everybody is in the proper order, you just go around to the left, okay? As if you were promenading home. Sequence is defined by Collar Lab as referring to the boys and girls sequence collectively. The girls can be in or out of sequence. The boys can be in or out of sequence. They can all be in or they can all be out. It's only one of those 4 states. That's it. There can be no others. If you're calling symmetrical, let me add that one. Okay. Oh, and just as a reminder, when they're in, they're in. When they're out, they're out. And that's what we usually say, out of order or out of sequence. When we talk about relationship, that's how the boy sequence is related to the girl sequence, or how a reference dancer is positioned relative to his or her partner. Essentially, it's like giving each dancer a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and although every piece will fit into every other piece, they're labeled, so they really only connect one way to make sense. Who's partners, who's corners, who's opposites. If you have the old collars, angels, checkers, those are labeled, and when the lines line up, you can tell what these relationships are. Once the formation, arrangement, and sequence are specified, this is the other piece of the puzzle that we need before we can call an Alaman left and a right and left grand. And of course, that's what relationship is all about. And the simplest way to illustrate that is to start with a squared set. Everybody join hands and circle left. Ladies in, men sachet. Now we're all still in sequence, but we've changed that relationship. Okay, and they're still going around in the circle. They're still alternating boy, girl, etc. They're still in sequence going around the ring, but the only thing changing is partner, corner, opposite, right-hand lady, back to partner. And that's essentially what relationship means. Now, this is a very, very simple definition, but and there's a lot more detail on each one of these, but that's just a quick recap. And the reality is, if you do that 3 more times, you've gone through every relationship state that you can possibly have. The other 3. The other 3 terms aren't new, but recently with the development of the controlled resolution manipulation system, or CRAMS, becoming a very prevailing system today, these things have become a lot more relevant to the setup of a Fazar state. These are also used for the purpose to achieve a specific target outcome, such as getting to a specific location on the floor, such as an at-home resolution or a right and left grand to end at home. And the terms that are used are exact, such as if I say a corner box exact, that would be the setup achieved from either heads or sides square through, not turn, not rotated or anything like that. That's the next, or sorry, that's not even the next one. The next one is orientation. Okay, this is pretty much the same as identifying the quadrant that the dancers are in, or their degree of rotation with respect to their home position. And, you know, and they can only be done in quarters. So you've got 0, 90, 180, or 270 degrees going clockwise around a square. And I don't know why it goes clockwise while the dancers go counterclockwise, but that's just a nuance of what we have. And that's the orientation. And that's really important, especially if you're working dancers along the grid, because you don't want to always work the same way. You want to change that orientation. That's why we have things like invert and rotate modules, because we get that orientation thing going. Why does ridiculous not have an E? Because I spelled it wrong. And the last one is occupation. Occupation is whether the reference dancer, and that's usually the boy, sorry girls, but that's just the reality of it at the moment, and I'll get to that later. It's when the reference dancer is specified to do something from a different position. And we've all done this. For instance, we set up something and we call center star, like we set up a double pass through and we call center star through, and I've got the heads in the middle. I could say heads square through, even though they're coming in from the side position. That's called occupation. We're dealing something specific, such as original sides pass through from a wave, or lines you're in there facing out, or in a two-phase line, head couples, partner trade, even though they're not in the head position. What we're doing is referencing their original starting position based on their occupation of spots on the floor. And that brings us full circle to callers communicating with other callers. Now, over the years since I've been calling, we've gone through several name changes and several references, each one being considered the be-all, end-all for its time. Each one is improving and each one's getting better, but we're all doing one thing. Each name was used to express a specific formation, arrangement, sequence, and relationship as a notation to other callers. So what it means simply is that regardless of what naming convention was used, each one has 4 distinctive parts that make up the name to describe that phasar state. And that still exists in what we have today. It's exactly the same as it was back then. We're just using different words. Sometimes one or more of the 4 positions are implied by the standard use that we use. And as a note, when one of those 4 parts is missing, it means that that aspect of the phasar state is not relevant to understanding the description. I use the term square through or swing through as an example. We say left swing through when we need to have clarification. We say swing through because it's defined as always being one thing. So for instance, if I don't have something that says normal or 0 or something like that, it's implied that it's a standard boy on the left, girl on the right setup. No matter how we describe it, all of these things achieve the same outcome, or as Shakespeare say, a rose, even if we call it potato, looks and smells just as sweet. That's what phasar is. And that quote by Shakespeare is probably the most important part, because it doesn't really matter how we describe it as long as we all get to enjoy the fragrance and we all know what it is that we're talking about. So let's start looking at what was, why, and we went through this myriad of transitions. So let's start with a pretty easy formation. Is this formation a heads lead to the right and circle to the line box? Is this a 1P, 2P line? Is this a 0L1P line? Is this a 0 line? Is this an Alaman left line, or is this a partner line? You can shout out because I can't see you.
I go 1P, 2P.
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
Yeah, all of
Yeah.
the above.
Each one of those descriptions will tell you 4 things. The first implies a static square with everybody at home and having the heads lead to the right and circle to a line. For a lot of new callers, that's how they describe the state. Oh, once you get to partner lines, how do I do it? Heads lead right, circle to a line. And I've heard callers say, well, if I'm in a heads lead right circle to a line, okay, I'm now here, I got number one couple on the left and they're lined up down the hall for me. There's nothing wrong with that description. I know exactly what you're talking about. In the second description, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's not a heads lead to the right line.
In this case, no, well,
And circle to a line.
in this case, I rotated it because it was too long the other way, but you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
Okay. I just
Because
did that
this
so I
would
could
be a part, would be specified about orientation or occupation. This
okay,
is where the OOs come
you're
in.
getting ahead of me on my text, but yes, you're absolutely correct.
Pardon.
No, it's great because that's actually what's important. If I did this, hang on.
Actually, that's why I thought it was a trick question, because I'm thinking, okay.
That's exactly what it was, is a trick question. That's a head lead right circle to a line. But is there any difference in that formation to that line? No. So is it a 1P, 2P line? Yes. Is it a 0L1P line? Is it a 0 line? Is it an element? But is it a heads lead right circle to a line? No.
Mm-mm.
It isn't a
Because
line. It isn't a line that tells you orientation, but
that's correct. And this is why, if I was going to do something there, where would that orientation be important? It would not be important to this Fazar state unless I was going to call something absolutely specific to get me back home, like pass through, wheel and deal, double pass through, centers trade and roll, box and that, slide back, swing your, or whatever, you know, to get everybody home. Unless I was calling something that's going to get me to an exact position, that description is really not important to what it is I'm trying to say. If I said, whoa, what was that? If I said I'm in a line, heads lead right circle to a line, and from there I can call, that's this line, whatever description, touch a quarter, all eight circulate, boys run, I'm now in a corner box or a box 1-4 or a 0 box or whatever it is. You can relate to where I am by any one of those descriptions. And that's what's important. The second one describes it, the third one describes it, the fourth one describes it, the fifth one describes it. It's an Alaman left line because we can do an Alaman left. It's a partner line in today's vernacular. Each one of those tells you 4 parts. So what does all this really mean? Well, in the grand scheme of things, as this is where I was getting to, Mickey, it doesn't really mean much at all. Because if you know the 4 parts, you know what the description should mean, regardless of what the terminology is. How you express it to the other caller is important that they understand what you're saying. All of this is a description for callers to communicate their idea. It is a description for callers to communicate their ideas clearly with other callers. And if all the callers understand what's being said, then whatever you're using is correct. If any of the callers don't understand what's being said, then obviously there's a breakdown of communication and what's being said is incorrect, which is what I was getting at with that, Mickey. Most would say that's a heads lead to the right circle to a line. It's a 0 line, but for new callers, but for inexperienced callers, no, it's not, because the orientation is wrong. The quadrant is wrong. Oh, what is going on? I could not get to that by doing heads lead right circle to a line. So it created confusion. So here's an example. If I'm in an ocean wave, all the boys are in the center in the sequence. And if I said I'm the caller, if I said to another caller, and some of you in this group might say it, I'm in a 5W2P formation. Probably maybe 3-4 of you in this room could understand exactly what that position was. If I say I'm in a 1/2 1P 2P wave, that puts boys in the middle, more callers would know what I'm saying. If I'm saying from a 0 line, partner trade and the girls roll twice, even more callers would know what I was saying. If I were to say from your partner line, all the boys run, almost everybody would know the picture of what I'm talking about. If I said heads lead right circle to a line, and from here, all the boys run, almost everybody in the room could picture where the dancers are. I'm in a 5W2P or a 5-1P2P. But which is the correct terminology? Well, the reality of communication, what I'm trying to stress when I coach and when I teach that, is the correct terminology that you use is the one that creates understanding and clarity for what you're trying to achieve. Don't get bogged down with all these oddball terminologies. There's a secret to figuring out every single one of them. But the reality is most of these terms fall into the category of who cares. Just like the formations, they fall into the category of who cares. Most are transition. They're only going to be there for a second or two anyway. They're only a reference to when a caller wants to explain a piece of choreographic sequence, such as a special get out or description from that specific starting point that you need to have a point of understanding. And if you've got that, it doesn't really matter how you describe it. If you both understand, you're both correct. So when we communicate with our dancers, we try to use terms that are standardized and easily referenced for dancers to understand. So as callers, we have to get much more into the technical aspects of what's important and what callers need to use to communicate quickly and accurately. And effective communication comes from having a common reference point to start from and agreeing to speak the same language in regard to those reference points. It's no different than two people that speak different languages. They'll point at the chest and say, Mel. And we now have a common reference point. My name is Mel, and so on and so forth. For that reason, and that reason alone, I think, Caller Labs standardized the naming conventions again. That was back in 2014. That's now 8 years ago, for the sole purpose of trying to make this communication easier. And I think there was 3 accredited Caller Lab coaches on that standardization committee. I can't see if Betsy's in here. I think Betsy was one of them, but I know at the time she was the chairman of the education committee. I can't remember who the other 2 were. But the process was that the training committee got together. They got a lot of input from all the callers on why we're confusing each other and why it takes so long to say something. And they said, what we're going to do is try and communicate more effectively by standardizing the names that we're going to use. And it's going to keep most of what was known, but eliminate the issues of misunderstanding by standardizing the terms and references for everyone to use. The key points to any description are still connected to the basic FASR naming convention. And those 4 relationships, partner, corner, opposite, right hand lady, or right hand, are still exactly the same. The references to the formations and sequence kept the descriptors that tell you that a reference boy had a certain starting position. So PL become partner line, CL become corner line. The relationship was the corner, you're in a line. OL become opposite line. The relationship is your opposite and you're in a line. Right hand lady line become RL. It tells you exactly what it is. Sequence was simplified too, as it always considered, sequence was simplified because it's considered implied that dancers are going to be always in sequence unless otherwise stated. And if you state they're out of sequence, you're going to put the letter O after it. And that has a meaning to the reference boy, example, head boy number 1, has the partner, and the other dancers are either in sequence or out of sequence. Now, there's a reason for this, for dancers being in sequence or out of sequence, because if you state where the dancers are and you state that partner relationship, because of symmetry, you're going to be able to identify where all of the other dancers are in sequence or out of sequence. So if they're in sequence and the girls are out, you've got half of your battle covered by that mirror symmetry. And Daryl's got some excellent exercises on Facebook right now that are going on that talk about that diagonal symmetry and that corner symmetry and that relationships. So PLO, partner line, out of sequence. CLO, corner line, out of sequence. OLO, opposite lady line, out of sequence. Right hand lady, or RLO, right hand lady line, out of sequence. By telling you the relationship of the type and if it's in or out of sequence, you can tell exactly where everybody is. It's giving you all 4 pieces of that information. For reference, many callers today still use such things as 0 box, 0 line, and then we get across the street box, lead to the right box. There's nothing wrong with those if the other dancers understand, or if the other callers understand what you're talking about. I'm out of my presentation, aren't I? There we are. Whoops.
Mel,
Yes,
you have it here in the other slide. Corner box was conspicuously missing.
in this slide.
Yeah, I don't see.
Yeah, I haven't got to the corner box yet. That's why it is conspicuously missing, and that will become very, very clear in just a second.
Okay.
Okay. This is the reason it was changed. I want you to listen to this and tell me what's right and what's wrong. Okay, so picture this. Heads square through, we're in a zero box. Now what we're going to do is a box zero by calling right and left through, which gives me a zero box, then a half sachet, pass through, face in. This gives us a zero box in the center. So if I have the center square through while the ends face in, that's a simple box zero, taking us from a zero box, which is also a zero box, by using zero box in center to bring us back to the zero box on the outside. From there, if I do a half chicken plucker, such as square through 3 and trade by, I have a zero box, which is an across the street box, zero box, but not a zero box. And it's important here to note that the zero box is out of sequence, but it's not a zero box out of sequence, but rather a right-hand lady zero box out of sequence. So a right and left through, this makes the zero box in sequence, but it's still an across the street box, but not a zero box, even though the zero box is part of the zero sequence. I can finish with a dive through, which gives me a partner box, which is a zero box for the centers, even though they're not in the zero box. And then the centers pass through, which is the completion of our box zero, which brings us right back to the zero box, which is also a zero box by the FASR naming description.
Mel,
Yeah.
I think there we have to make a distinction between a zero box, which was defined and usually to getting up to an element left, and the other one was a zero arranged box, which could be any
Absolutely.
kind of normal
Absolutely.
box. Yeah.
And
But a zero box usually was this. Let's put it that way. A zero box was always a zero arranged box, but not every zero arranged box was a zero box.
Absolutely. And I think you begin to understand the reason for this change was because if a caller was to say what I just said to you, that is absolutely 100% correct. But his or her students, the newer callers, would be lost because when you communicate something like this, you can't tell if the letter Z is capitalized, and where one means a FASR state, the other means a simple standard on the boy on the left, girl on the right, small z, zero. And as Betsy put it in the dialogue, the reason for the term zero, the reason they dropped the term zero from the formations is as a reference to a choreographic sequence to achieve the FASR and the same FASR outcome. Just as the zero line has changed to partner line, so you've changed the names of the boxes. So zero box became corner box. Zero box out of sequence became corner box out of sequence, or CBO. Across the street box became a right-hand lady box out of sequence. If I establish that right-hand lady box and do a right and left through, it becomes an RB, or just a right-hand lady box. Each one of those tells us all four things. It's implied the zero, or the number zero, is standard boy on the left, girl on the right. That's implied, so we don't have to say it. The O at the end, or the corner, tells us the relationship grouping. The B tells us the formation we're in, it's a box. And O at the end tells us we're either in or out of sequence. And this is very, very clearly what Mickey was saying. The reason we dropped zero is because it got confusing, because there's a zero box, there's a zero box, and there's a box zero. And you can be in a box that's not a zero box, but still be a zero box.
You can also have a normal box.
Yeah, and a normal box. Let's just add that one to the mix. So all of these kinds of things did apply. The one thing that is there is, you notice on there, lead to the right box, that changed to LRB. And the reason it changed to LRB was lead to the right, changed to lead right box.
Mel,
It was only changed to match the acronym.
Mel,
Yes, go ahead.
Daryl is trying to wave and you can't see him waving. He needs to
I cannot see anybody. That's why I said if you do have a question, speak up, please. Interrupt me.
I'm not good at interrupting. I'm sorry. I'm so confused by some of what you've been saying, and I know this stuff pretty well.
Yep.
Okay, so let's say that you had the head star through, pass through. Where are they?
They're in an RBO, right-hand lady box out of sequence. Or
Why
an
do you
across.
call, why do you call that a right-hand lady box?
Because it's a right-hand grouping, it's a box, and the dancers with the reference boy are out of sequence.
They're in a box of 4, right?
Yep,
In this grid made up of 2 boxes of 4. Am I right?
that's correct.
Okay. And
And they're with
everybody in that box has within that box their right-hand lady, right?
That is correct.
That's why they call it a right-hand lady box. Now, if they do
Yeah.
a star through, what do they have?
They're now not in a box, they're in lines. 2 boxes are lines.
But
This
they
is-
have,
this is
but
why-
they have, but they have right-hand lady lines, don't they?
That's correct.
Okay. The one thing that I kind of wonder about, as we're sailing through this stuff pretty quickly, the partner lines are still a partner box, are they not?
In the FASAR description, the
Well,
thing you have to,
if
yeah,
they're-
just wait a second, Darrell. The answer to your question is no. And the reason it's no is one reason only. A FASAR description does not describe 2 dancers, or sorry, 2 couples. A FASAR description describes 8 in a formation. So they're not 2 boxes, even though they are. It's a line because that describes 8 people. And that's the only reason. And once you
they
get that,
are 2 boxes within that grid, and in
they
those
are 2 boxes. They're actually 3 boxes.
In
if you got
that
the
2
center box
boxes,
as
you
well.
could have, well, you could have partner boxes, couldn't you?
Yep. And
Okay.
that's fine. But
So
when you have a FASAR description, and that's all I'm not talking about where they go or how many different combinations
but
of boxes you can have.
part
What
of
I'm
the
talking about is a FASAR description describes 8 dancers. And that's the important context to remember when you're giving a description.
I think that the understanding might be better about all of it if they understand the possibilities within each of those boxes, because that's
Yep,
where the actual
comes
names
later.
come from. Oh,
That
you
comes
got that
later.
all, you got that all down here. I'm so sorry to interrupt you there.
No, by all means. The key with all of this is the principle of communication remains a simple term to tell the callers who is where as a starting point for discussion. And like Darrell said, if I have a corner box or a head square through box and I call star through, I don't have corner boxes anymore. I still have a corner grouping, but I'm in what's called a corner line, mainly because the description describes all 4 dancers in each line and all 8 dancers in the square. It tells me where every dancer is by that description. If I'm going to do something specific, such as something with the centers only, I now have a center box because I'm saying centers, and that box is a half sachet box. And you have to understand that, but in order to understand that, and Darrell's absolutely correct, you have to understand a FASAR term describes 8 dancers in a formation, a specific arrangement, a specific sequence, and a specific relationship. After that, there's a whole bunch of little subsets that can come to that. And most of them are not important unless you're doing something specific. And the key to communication is to make sure that what you're doing specifically is going to be very clear to the person you're talking to. Yeah, so let's make it simple. FASAR is a term, we used it because it rolls off the tongue. It was an acronym like almost every other acronym, but we as callers almost never use it in the order in which it's presented to explain things, which is one of the reasons why it's often confusing. If it was done correctly, it would be called ARFs, because we usually talk about the arrangement being applied in any of these descriptions. You know, is it a standard relationship or is it a half sachet relationship? Is it a same-sex relationship? We talk the formation next. What kind of formation is it? A box? Is it a line? Is it a double pass-through? Whatever. And then we talk sequence, because it's not specified usually if it's in or out of sequence. If it's in sequence, we say nothing, and then we let them know if it's specified. After that, what we've done is we put a qualifier in the front. L hyphen means left hand. or O at the back, which means out of sequence, or OW, such as ocean wave. It's in an ocean wave. And we get all of these kinds of things that happen in these phasar states. So understanding that, let's do a quick little quiz. Okay, so we understand that this is a corner box. Okay, so are there any extras to that? None. So we know that there's no letter, no number. It's not half sachet. It doesn't have a 1, 2, 3, 4, or a 5 after it or in front of it. So we know that this is standard. Boy on the left, girl on the right. The arrangement is implied. We know that it's a corner grouping because everybody's got their corner in this grouping. We know that the formation is a box. And it's called a box formation because we're describing all 8 dancers. An 8 chain through formation, it's a box formation. And we don't have anything after corner box, so it's implied that it's in sequence. And we don't have any extras after, such as OW, meaning ocean wave, or anything along that line. So that says corner box. There it is. Is that clear to everybody?
One thing, Mel.
Yes.
You're talking about phasar being for 8 dancers,
Yeah.
and you're saying in sequence. So are you talking about the 4 dancers in the group are in sequence, or are you talking
No.
about the 8 dancers?
Phasar describes all 8 dancers. So if I say there's a corner relationship, that means this is a corner relationship. By default, if I put the number 1 lady over here, it would no longer be a corner relationship, would it?
Diagonal opposites answers, I think, what Alan was talking
Absolutely.
about.
Absolutely. That's why I pointed out the exercises you're doing. They're very, very, very good exercises. A phasar description describes all 8 dancers. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, this will become a lot clearer to where we say, here's 1 box.
The problem
Here's a
is,
box,
Mel,
back to back.
the problem is, Mel, you are defining a corner box. And
Yes.
that's where you miss, where people miss the point. As soon as you say box, you're implying it's not all 8. You're implying it's 4.
No, it's
that's
like saying, I know you're absolutely correct. And this is where the leap of faith comes. If I say a line, I'm talking about 4 dancers in 1 line, but the phasar state is a line, which means 2 lines. The phasar box means 2 boxes, or an 8 chain 4 formation. That's the phasar box formation. It describes 2 boxes. And that's the leap of faith that you have to accept with phasar. A phasar state describes 8 dancers and where they are. And there's no way of getting around it. When you relate to understanding it, you're only looking at one side because of this mirror symmetry and the diagonal opposites. But the description of phasar has all 8 people. And that's where it sometimes gets confusing. And that only applies if you're calling symmetrical. Okay, this may come a little bit clearer as we go through this. But hang on to that question now, that comment, because it's a very, very valid one. Okay, so here's an idea. I've got corner box up here. Just ignore this. This is just showing where. So I've got PLO. So I have nothing in front. So there's no half or anything else front. Or no weird and wonderful L or anything like that. I've got no number in front. So it's implied a standard relationship, which means boy on the left, girl on the right. I've got a P, which means I've got a partner grouping. I've got L, which tells me I'm in a line. In sequence, it says out of sequence. And there's nothing on the end to add any qualification or explanation. So what I have is a standard boy on the left, girl on the right, partner relationship out of sequence. What would that formation look like? Somebody describe that to me, preferably one of the new callers.
A normal partner line with a right and left through.
Perfect. Now, is PLO the correct description, or is a normal partner line doing a right and left through the correct description? And the answer is they're both correct. And if you got that, then you'd be correct. How about this one? Okay, so I've got a 1/2 CB. So I don't have any weird fancy L's or letters before it. I've got 1/2, which tells me something. I've got corner box, which tells me something. I've got nothing after it, so it tells me they're in sequence. Anybody care to hazard where they would be?
They would be in a corner box half sashayed in an 8 chain through position.
Okay. Would
Yeah.
they be?
They're out of sequence.
Okay, so I've told you sequence. So
It
it
would
says
be
they're
a-
in sequence, so we have to fix that.
Right.
Heads
there.
were through 4 and a box to net.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Square through 4, box the net, or from a corner box, as was saying, right and left through, then the half sachet.
yeah.
Now, there's a reason I'm using these formations. It's not to say this is what you have to use. The reason I'm pointing these out goes to what Daryl was saying. Collar Labs standardized this terminology to try and make it easier for everybody as a reference point. And if we're all using exactly the same language, it becomes easier, and we should try and learn the correct language. But the reality is, if I said to you a corner box or a 1/2 or half sashayed corner box in sequence, if you don't picture that, like Mickey said, head square through, box the nat box, or from a 0 box, right and left through and half sachet, however you describe it to get the dancer you are talking to understand where you're starting from is the correct terminology.
I have a question.
Yes, Bob.
It's about the sequence.
Yeah.
It seems to me so far that when you refer to sequence, you only refer to couples in or out of sequence.
No,
Not
here I've
that-
got, here they're in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the girls 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes. So that's couples. It's not having like boys out of sequence or girls out of sequence.
That's covered in this partner relationship. Because if I say a partner relationship, if I change the sequence of these two girls, it's no longer a partner relationship, is it?
I guess
No
I'm
longer a
confused.
corner relationship.
Sorry, corner. Thank you, Alan.
Okay,
Or
let's take a 0 box and do a flutter wheel. Now describe that as far as the sequence
Okay.
state.
They in or out?
It's a corner group, but you've got a mixed arrangement.
I've just written that down, Bob, because I'd like to go through. I'm getting near the end. I've got through that, but we'll look at that right at the end. I've got from a 0 box, as you said, do a flutter wheel, and we'll look and see exactly what that is. Okay. So I've got that. That's going to be the first one we look at the end.
So Mel,
Or
I guess the thing about this conversation is quite simple. It really depends on the callers who are talking to each other and when they were trained, and whether or not they upgraded their skills to go with what the current technology is or current naming standard is, or if they just live in their own little world and they basically went with the training that they got at first. And so, you know, when I first started learning,
absolutely true, Brian.
yeah, when I first
Absolutely
started
true.
learning, I had no idea what a 1P, 2P line. It was explained to me. And then I go, okay, well, I know what that is. And then later on, it was changed. And so now 1P, 2P is, I can only talk that language with callers who were trained around the same time I was.
But it also goes the other way. I had this conversation with Yolanda last week. I believe she was in a conversation with another caller, and she had to explain what a corner box is, because Collard never used that. Even Bob, who knows what a corner box, referred to if I'm in a zero box and I do a flutter wheel, because that's his terminology. A newer caller might not know what a zero box was. And there's a simple solution to that. And you're absolutely correct. The training that we got, and I'm not doing this to confuse you deliberately. What I'm trying to point out is that we have standard naming conventions. This is what Color Lab agreed, and Color Lab members are supposed to all agree to use the standardized naming convention. But FASAR, if we're trying to use FASAR descriptions like a 4RB, what it is, if that's confusing and you don't understand what that is, don't use it. Make sure that the people you're talking to understand what it is you're saying. Eventually, if we all start standardizing, we say, okay, oh, that's what a 4RB is. So this one has a number in front of it. What does the 4 mean? Does anybody remember what the 4 means?
Right in.
Boys, isn't it? Boys, girls.
I think this goes with the arrangement.
4, typically sashayed. So we got our boy, half sashayed couple towards the outside. That's what a 4 means, or a girl-girl, boy-boy relationship.
I'm not sure in the line whether this is correct, because I think in the line, this is going to be, if you had boy, boy, girl, girl, I think it's either a 1 or a 2.
See that? Remember what I said about waves? It's towards the outside. So, we've got a half
Boy,
sashayed.
girl, girl is a 1.
Exactly. Girl, girl, boy, boy. Is what we have.
That's a 2.
But we're in a box. So we're not in a line, we're in a box. So we've got, okay, it basically means that we've got one pair half side. This would be very clear if I wrote, boy, boy, girl, girl on that side, but that's not what it's describing. This describes all 8 dancers. This is why we don't focus on just 4 dancers, because it gets confusing unless you have all 8.
I was there when we came up with all these. I was there when we came up. I was there on the committee when we came up with this numbering system, and I was against it then. Sorry, but I am against it now for the same reason that we're sitting here going around. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Who cares? Go with the girl, girl, boy, boy, and everybody's going to understand. And if communication is the reason for doing it, we're just muddying it up with those numbers.
Yep, 100%.
Well, and the easiest way to deal with it these days is to pull terminations out and show them what you mean.
So, and now this C right here, this girl, girl, boy, boy, this is why we don't look at it as 4 dancers. This is boy, boy, girl, 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 boy, boy. I got that one wrong. It should be the other way around.
Okay, I guess it was misleading because maybe all 8 should have been there. Then it would have been clearer, because I thought it was
absolutely
lines.
And that was done because I was anticipating that the question, it came a little bit earlier. I was anticipating the question, are we describing 4 dancers when we talk about FASAR, or are we describing 8 dancers? In this, when we look at these kind of relationships, we always start looking which way the dancers have their back to us. So we've got to get it so dancers have their back to us. Here it is, girl, girl, boy, boy, girl, girl, boy, boy. Outside couple is half sashayed, inside couple is standard. And as Daryl says, to try and figure this out, these are the standard conventions.
I don't have any problem figuring it out. I do have some questions for you, Mel. Here's one. How many formations are there in these 8 dancers, and how many of them involve all 8 collectively?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't answer that. There are hundreds of formations and subformations in each formation.
There are hundreds of arrangements, and in your normal everyday choreography, you have parallel waves, right? You have a double pass through, you have 2 face lines, you have mini waves or a half tag if you like, and a 3/4 tag.
Yeah, I believe in standardized formations, you've got 79 formations, of which 22
Yeah.
are the regular commonly
Okay.
used ones.
And what I'm talking about, I'm not saying that we don't have more formations than that. What I'm saying is you're still talking, if you talk about parallel waves, you got one here, one here. You don't have two. You know, that's not.
I agree,
And
Daryl.
your
Daryl,
your diagonal opposites is going to take care of any kind of confusion. If you can tell me what's in this wave, I can tell you what's in that wave. If you tell me what
I agree
have here,
100%,
tell you
Daryl,
that.
and that's what the phasar is supposed to do. But
yeah,
and
that's
I agree
another
with
thing.
you. I'm
I
trying to tell you this, Daryl.
I go along with the acronym as long as we don't have to put it FARS, which is farce.
Yeah.
All the parts are right and everything.
So what I'm going to ask
just confuses issues as well.
What I'm going to ask is you bear with me, because I do come to this, and a lot of you are jumping ahead of what the point I'm trying to get with on this. This is what is the Collar Lab standard now. And what we use as the standard is unfortunately not always clear, depending on who you're talking to. And that is a problem that I have. That is a problem that you have, and a lot of callers have. If I look at 1/2 LRB, it's a half sachet lead to the right box. Okay, it's implied boys are in, girls are out because of the way it's said. I've got the partner grouping, I'm in a box. It tells me everything. The reason it tells me everything is because of exactly what Daryl's saying. The groupings, if I look at one side, the other side's a mirror image, but that's not the way we're describing it. There's no way to actually accurately describe every aspect of these kinds of things using phasar. Half sachet lead to the right box. This one, left 1/2 corner box, ocean wave. That has everything in it. It's got a little bit before. It's got my arrangement, which is half sachet. It's got my grouping, which is the corner grouping. It's got my formation, which is a box. And I don't have anything here, so it's implied to be in sequence. And the ending formation is an ocean wave. And if you remember what we said about ocean waves are expressed differently. Boy, girl, girl, boy, etc., etc., etc. If I were to say that to somebody, I would probably confuse the hell out of them. And I'm not saying that to be difficult. But if I say heads, or if I rotate that, but if I said heads square through 4, let's just do that just to make it clear.
Rotate it, yes. Everybody will make sense of it, yes.
Okay, so if I say heads square through 4 and step to a left-hand ocean wave, almost everybody in this room will understand exactly what I'm saying. They'll know who's with who. If I say a 1/2, or sorry, if I say an L 1/2 CB OW, I've probably lost half the floor or more, even though that's the correct phasar terminology. This is an L 1/2 CB. This is an L 1/2 CB. I've got the sides in the head position. So if I circle the square quarter and then called sides, you know, there's a lot better ways of understanding this. Phasar is to try and get a commonality of expressing. And phasar is used for one reason and one reason only, and that's so callers can communicate with other callers without having to dance around different subjects to figure out where the dancers are. And if it doesn't work, then don't use it. Even in preparing it, how many people got them all right? I probably may have if I had time to study, but I'd be very impressed if everybody got 5 out of 5 on that. Okay, and this has been the standard now for 8 years, and it's still not used by most callers, except for brand new callers or Collar Lab accredited coaches when we're teaching, and we use the simple terms like corner box, partner line, right-hand lady box, and lead to the right box. Beyond that, Fazar states are not often used to describe dancers. And the reason is exactly what was being said. It's not clear for communication. There is good news on this. And if you didn't score 100, don't matter. All these
Mel?
annotations are only a means
Mel?
to communication. Sorry.
There's a bit of a joke here. If you reverse S and R, what have we got? A farce.
True enough. That's what Daryl was saying, as long as it's not FARS. Okay. If you say from an L1/2 PBO, what's the fastest get out? Oh my God. But if I say heads, lead right, veer left, all the boys turn around, you'd probably be able to visualize it a lot better and say, okay, what's the fastest get? Well, okay, if I call trade the wave and swing your partner, you're 2 steps from home. That's how it works. If I can tell you where the dancers are quickly and easily, I can establish the point I want to show you a specific piece of choreography from. Both of those are Fazar descriptions. Both of those are correct if the person I'm talking to understands what it is I'm saying. Both of those are wrong if the person I'm talking to does not understand what I'm saying.
Mel?
The correct one is, I'm just about done here, so I'll just hold your questions for a second. The correct one is the one that facilitates this communication. And as long as everybody knows what you mean, you're right. I've been saying how to get around it. You know, a 1/2 corner box is a half sashayed corner box out of sequence, or sorry, 1/2 CBO, I should say, and all that. If you don't understand those and you're talking to another caller, the secret is ask the question. There's many, many ways to say the same thing, and we've seen a lot of that here today. Okay, calling is about communication, and if you don't know what I mean, I can explain it from a number of different ways, from a head square through box, everybody right and left through half sachet, and you know where I am, then you know where the dancers are. In this kind of case, although Color Lab standardized the names that would be technically correct, it would be terribly wrong to use them and not use a longer explanation if the communication is not clear. I'm not going to tell you to use something. That would be like me speaking to you in Yiddish and being absolutely 100%, but you don't speak Yiddish. Doesn't matter how correctly I explain it. If you don't understand it, you're not going to understand what I'm trying to say to you. These terms are standardized for simplicity and commonality, but the reality is the correct way is the one that works for everybody involved. The committee hoped these changes would facilitate communication between the parties and, you know, what would be standard, what would be non-standard, and even sometimes, but even those that were on the committee, and as Daryl said, he was around at this time, they're human. They're trying to find a way to make it easier for us. And it is on the simple formations and setups. But when it gets confusing, when you try to apply it to everybody and you lose that communication, it's just plain wrong. So just be clear of what it is you're trying to say. So that's pretty much the totality of communication between callers. We do a lot of communications. That's our bread and butter, is to understand. If I'm talking to Masako in Japan and I say, oh, 1P, 2P out of sequence, and she goes, what? But if I say heads, lead right, do the right and left through, you with me? Yeah, I'm with you. She knows where I am. The second one is correct, even though it may not be the standardized approved choreography. We need to take this back to simplicity and recognize that Fazar describes 8 dancers. When we're trying to sort things out, that diagonal relationship lets us look at one side of the square and understand what the other side of the square is doing. And with any one of those 8 dancer formations, there can be a whole bunch of little subformations. And the way we get to understand that is get back to our very, very basics of calling, understanding what a square is, understanding what moving up and down the grid is, and understanding those diagonal relationships. After that, how we explain and communicate to each other is going to be different between any 2 people. So use what works. And that's the message that I'm trying to get across. I had a question on the floor, and then I want to get to Bob's question. Somebody started saying something when I said, just hold that thought for a second.
Oh, I just had wanted to mention to those, let me get the, so they're not scared. about what we're talking, and we're talking about communication. And I think there has to be a distinction of communication between colors, scientific wise, and describing the state of a square and maybe writing things down, and then talking with each other and saying, can you follow me? I think the more simple we keep it and then just lead through the choreo, it's easier to follow than just have those shortcuts put out. I think what everybody should be aware of should be the regular arrangements and maybe the half sachet, but the others are pretty tough, and you usually have to work with your diagrams as well. And so I think in communication, there's got to be a difference between the scientific wise, for what reason ever, if we write something or work something out, or if we communicate like, hey, I've got that choreo, and we start talking. So you got to be always arranged with each other.
Okay, Bob, you asked this question. From a head square through or a zero box, if I did a flutter wheel, what is the Fazar state on this?
Corner box, Mel. Use the correct terminology.
I was repeating what Bob said. But you're correct. Bob said a zero box, a corner box, absolutely correct. Or a head square through box, also correct. Okay, so what is the Fazar state? Well, first let's look at what do we got. Is our arrangement standard or non-standard?
Standard.
Normal.
It's zero.
Zero. So, and the Fazar state is given from the reference boy. What's wrong with this? The reference boy is number one man. And box reference is supposed to be with the person you're looking at. That would be an opposite, because number one man is looking at his opposite. It's a box.
Out of sequence.
Is it out of sequence or in sequence?
So the girls are in, the boys are out.
That's right. So we've got a number for that, don't we? Girls in, boys out. Does anybody remember that?
3, is it?
Boys
When the
out.
girls are in, boys are out is a number 4. So we've got a 4 BO, sorry, a 4, I should say, 4 OBO. And that will tell
I
me
think
we're
Bob
all
wasn't done. If we put a circle to a line, then we would have a corner line. I think that's the better way.
Now that was the question. And if I said to you, this is a 4 OBO, that would tell me that my reference boy, okay, I'm number 4. I've got the boys in sequence. I'm sorry, I've got the girls in sequence, the boys out of sequence. I've got the O, my reference boy is facing his opposite. I've got B, they're in a box. And of course the sequence is out. That's confusing. And to me, I would not describe it that way. I would describe this as from a corner box. If I did a flutter wheel, this is where I am.
Or step 2, wave and recycle. I'd be more likely to call that.
Yeah.
The other way of looking at it, Mel, is it's a corner group.
Yep.
And everybody still has their corner as a partner, but it's a mixed arrangement, isn't it?
And absolutely, and it is. And this is what we talk about. This is why it gets so confusing as callers communicating. When we talk about corner groupings, that's a corner grouping that hasn't changed. Let me just put this on. Where's my
if you're going to use,
If you look at this red line here, I don't have to worry about this. I know they're a corner grouping. I know they're set up exactly the same as this box. The rules of diagonal opposites, 4, 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4, 2. That's all exactly the same. I can sort this out on one side of the square. But if I only work one side, I'm not describing Fazar. Fazar is not something to describe how to move dancers. Fazar describes one thing, a start point. Once you all know where the dancers are, Fazar doesn't exist anymore until you stop and say, here's the new point. And what I say is, if I'm in this kind of a situation and I'm trying to show something, I would not use that description unless I knew everybody I was talking to understood that description.
I like when people use the sequence of calls way of describing something, like the corner box and flutter wheel. I like that one better than the one that was suggested, which was corner box step to a wave recycle. They both, of course, are the same thing at the end. But the reason I like the flutter wheel one that Mel mentioned is because it's easy to think about ladies chain, and what you've got there is a corner box men chain, which is AKA flutter wheel. And everybody should know that, flutter wheel is from a normal setup. Flutter wheel is a boys chain.
All right. Now let me qualify that by saying the figure was head squared through a flutter wheel. Now, how are they going to get into that flutter wheel smoothly?
Oh, sorry. That wasn't the figure that was called. What Bob said when he said it, if you're in a 0 box and you did a flutter wheel. So just ignore how I got there.
Okay. Even at that, I would still say, how are you going to get there into that corner box? It's going to allow for a nice flutter wheel action. Not to mention the fact that flutter wheel, part of that is a turning two-phase line, and those center couples are going to be fairly crowded. They're going to have to be some pretty good square breathing there to make that better.
Absolutely.
Than a step
Well,
away from recycle.
I personally don't like using a flutter wheel from corner boxes unless that square is already expanded. I don't like doing tight movements in there where they're crunching each other in the center.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can argue about the aesthetics of whether or not that sequence is a nice one to call, but the reason that we're naming that sequence is not because we're suggesting someone should actually call it. It's just a way of describing the ending formation, as if we did a flutter wheel, even though that's yucky.
You're muted, Bob.
Thank you, Mel. The whole point was to describe what is the Fazar state, not the body flow. I know my body flow, I could have said veer left, bend the line, and slide through, depending on what came before. I was curious about, is there an easy way to describe a corner box, if you will, okay, putting two of the dancers out of, there's the out of sequence if you do the right and left through, but I could not understand how to describe just putting two of the dancers out of sequence, the boy and either the boys or the girls, and I chose the boys. And all of a sudden it just became overwhelming.
Sorry about that.
It was about, become about the choreography. It wasn't. And that's fine. I wasn't looking at body flow either. It was just the setup, however I got there, totally irrelevant. It was just, what is the Fazar description on this? And the problem with Fazar is you've got, as with any of these descriptions, implied and actual. And if something's implied, it's not stated. So you tend to not think about it. So if we don't have that number 4 in front, we're assuming that it's a 0. But wait a minute, the 4 implied 0, now it's a 4, 0, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it gets confusing. And this is why, if you've got it, if you had it with 4 spots, actually you need 6 spots, each with an underline to tell you what they are. And the way they're expressed is ARFS with a blank and a blank. Once those are all fit in. And that's why, as I think, Daryl, you hit the nail right on the head when you said, I understand this stuff, but this is even confusing to me. And you're absolutely correct. To try and force this down to say everybody use the same terminology, great. And when we have new callers today, we use the terminology. There's I think 14 terms that are on the 2014 description to describe Fazar. Nothing else has changed. So all the rest of that still stays. But nobody's ever taken the time to explain that each one of these Fazar states has 4 parts, even though there may only be 2 letters like PL, there's still 4 spots, and each one of those 4 spots is described, and it tells you where all 8 dancers are. That part's left out of the equation too often because it is too confusing. This setup that you gave, Bob, is a very confusing state to describe because you've got the 4 hyphen 0, then you've got your partner, then you've got your box, and then of course we've got our sequence. And then we've got, if I say step to an ocean wave from here, I would have to put dash OW on the end of it. And that's too confusing. It's a lot easier to say head, step in, face your corner, flutter wheel. Okay, from here, and everybody knows where you are. I'm not worried about the choreography. I'm not worried about how I got there because from here, I want to do something. I want to show a specific get out from this specific spot. And that's what Fazar is to describe where the dancers are on the floor as a start of communication. It's not how to move dancers or anything else. It's a reference point, static. They're here. What do I do from here?
Sorry, I can't help but as we're going through stuff, my mind says, well, I would never call it. But
oh, I agree.
But anybody that knows me knows how concerned I am about getting new callers into the activity. And I'll tell you what, all of this stuff is just far too technical. And that's what's happened to our activity right now. We spend more darn time trying to figure out all of this highly technical stuff that we can throw out there into the activity. And we're not only driving people out, we're not encouraging them to come in. Let's make it simple. We just flat out don't need all of that. It's too much. And I said it at the time. Telephone's ringing. Sorry about that. Hey, Caller Lab. I love Caller Lab. I'm a gold card member of Caller Lab. They can't throw me out. Maybe they can. I don't know. But some of the stuff that they've been doing is just plumb dumb.
It's the 1950s are calling
There's
out.
no reason for this. I mean, I went through Lippman's, box 1-4, corner box, 0 box, all of this stuff. Now I've got a page here that's telling me all of the new way to write it down. And RL for right hand lady line, PLO for partner line out of C, all of that. Can you imagine if they're going to redo all of the printed material and put in the correct little things there in brackets? This is going to be monstrous. Now listen, gang. Mel said, okay, there's thousands of formations. Off top of my head, I think there's 72. I didn't look it up, but I think there's actually 72. And most of them we don't use. not for your normal dancers. You go out there into the mainstream or even the plus world, you're not going to have that many. And the diagonal opposites is a wonderful thing, because if I have a wave here, I have a wave here. If I have a box here, I have a box here. If I have a diamond here, I have a diamond here. And those two boxes are the secret to everything. You've actually got three boxes, because you have that one in the center that's made up of two couples, or one couple from each of those other boxes. Which, what do we do with that box in the middle? Pass through it to get to the other box. We don't spend any time in that middle box, because the others are standing there watching us, right? So the nearest thing we have to get into there is Ferris wheel. That puts you in that double pass-through position. And how long do you stay there? What do? You might do one or two movements in there, but typically you'll go right back to the box you were in, or you'll turn around and go to the other box. So our dancing is just going back and forth between those two boxes. Those two boxes we call a grid, and it's either going to go east-west or it's going to go north-south. And you're going to be dancing two couples in a very, very limited number of formations all the time. Now you can mix them around just a little bit within those two couples. You only have four dancers. You only have two sequences. They're either going to be in or out. Now you take those lines, they're actually two boxes in lines. And there's not a whole lot to this stuff. It's very simple.
Absolutely, there's not. And what you're describing, the difference in what you're describing is not Fazar states. What you're describing is choreographic management.
Fazar is an.
No, I understand that, Daryl. Daryl, I'm agreeing.
Hey, what's the formation? What's your right? The only two that make any difference, Mel, until Alaman left, is formation and arrangement. Now, as far as
I'm in agreement with you. You're talking about moving dancers.
An Alaman left sequence relates to an Alaman left. Nobody talks those things.
Daryl, I'm in complete agreement with you here. What I'm saying is, Fazar is a statement of where the dancers are as a common reference point. And if you don't understand that reference point, it doesn't make any sense. For instance, Daryl, if I said to you, heads star through, you know exactly where the dancers are.
Certainly.
If I say you're in a double pass through position and the heads are on the opposite side, you probably have an idea of where the dancers are or what it is I'm trying to communicate. What I do from there is what's important. And that's what we're talking about. Fazar itself is like the names of all these formations. They fall into the category of who cares what it's called. It's a transition state until I'm ready to resolve the square or I want to do something specific.
Well,
hang on, let me finish.
What is your point?
Where it becomes specific is I want to set up
an hour going through all of these little complicated things. What is your point?
My point is, when you want to communicate an idea, I want to set up a specific situation that I have a module get out. I have to be in this exact spot with these footprints on that position. I can describe that Fazar state to another caller and explain the choreography. But other than that, Fazar, the terminology of Fazar is not that important. It's what we use as callers.
I've taught callers for many, many years and explained Fazar to them, and it's not that big a deal. It's now, if I were going to go carry on a conversation with, Dottie Welsh, then you can start talking the numbers of the arrangements and all of this stuff, and she's going to understand it perfectly well. But if I go to talk Fazar with Yolanda, I'm going to break that thing down, way down. I want new callers come in. I want to take care of this average caller that's out there right now. And if I can find a way to make it simpler, I'm going to do it. But like I said,
I think you've just hit the nail on the head of the summary of what I presented.
Can we
It's
can
to
we hear
facilitate
can we hear
communication.
what Ross wants to say? Because she's
Yeah.
been holding her hand up for a while now.
Sorry.
Okay, probably a few things. On that corner box flutter wheel, if someone said that to me, they're just talking about what position they're in, not how to get there. If they said that, I know exactly where the dancers are. If they say 6 moves, I've got to work it through my head, work out where they are. So this was purely in this position, whatever you're going to talk about. I think maybe I'm talking for Yolanda as well. I think she might agree. When we first started, 1P, 2P line took me ages to work out what that was. And callers will use it. It's written in material. And you look and go, what in the hell are they talking about? Corner box, partner box, all that was very confusing at first. And I think she'd agree with that.
Oh, yes.
So it's a matter of, one, keep it simple. Maybe the complicated stuff we don't need to necessarily know, but what a corner box, what a partner line is, all this, some things I didn't know today. I never heard of before this half and all that. So it's the terminology, and whether it be you're in a corner box or whether it be like corner box flutter wheel, however you describe it, it's, as you say, how you're telling us and how we're understanding. It's not whether it's right or wrong. It's how to communicate between a new caller. And it's so wonderful to see all you callers confused. We thought it was just us.
Well, this is one of, Yolanda and I had a talk about this last week, and it was actually this discussion, and it was this and the conversation that was a week before, which was an hour and a half long with 6 callers, 45 minutes to discuss choreography, was based on finding out how we're going to actually express the formations we're in. And we all come to the conclusion, we all knew what a corner box was. We all knew what a partner line was, even though most of us used 0 box and 0 line interchangeably. We all knew what an across the street box or a right-hand box was. But beyond that, we described exactly what you're saying. From a corner box flutter wheel or from a corner box right and left through, that's how we got it. And this is what the whole point of FASAR is. FASAR is designed as commonality, but it's not. FASAR added a degree of confusion beyond the very, very basic fixed points, line, box, etc., to try and get everybody to speak a language that if you try and do that, it becomes confusing. It's like technical definitions. There's ways to dance and keep the dancers happy, or there's ways to confuse the hell out of people, which just makes them angry. We need to get it simple. We've got lessons on FASAR that are miles long. Each element of FASAR is important to moving dancers and manipulating dancers around the floor. That's true. But you do not need to know all of these terms, the same as you don't need to know the names of all the formation. 60 to 80% of that falls into the category of who cares? You're not going to be there long enough to worry about it. If you understand what I'm saying and I understand what you're saying, that's what FASAR is. We have a common starting point, and that's what we need to get to move on to the important stuff. Alan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think Daryl, in his wisdom, is posing a proposition to us that there may be a better system than FASAR to be able to explain very simply to new callers and old callers what we're talking about, where we are. And so maybe the approach that FASAR is the wrong approach. We need to, maybe the brains need to think about, is there another system we can come up with that uses the mirror image stuff? It makes it simple. And really all you're doing when you're talking about a box or a line is the orientation of the 4 dancers. Are we orientating them so they're in the line, or are we orientating them so they're in the 8-chain 4? And so maybe we need to think, is there a better way of describing it rather than FASAR? Because certainly FASAR has hairs on it. There's no doubt about it.
You remember when you were in Wollongong when Betsy came down, were you, Alan?
Yes.
Yeah. You remember what she was talking about FASAR, and she was heavily involved in this. FASAR is formation, arrangement, sequence, relationship. Those 4 things are extremely important. To sum up what was essentially a half-hour session, the problem with FASAR is, although each one of those is very important, trying to put a label on all of them at the same time is an absolute waste of time. Because all you do is you're trying to You need to know arrangements. You need to know sequence. You need to know relationships. You need to know formations, and you need to know those all at different times, whether it's 2 couples, 1 couple, all 4 couples. That's what you need to know for what you're trying to achieve when you're trying to achieve it. To try and put a name on every little bit of that is a waste of time, because you're not going to be there long enough to deal with it. Because we have those 4 things as being so important, we're trying to put a label on something that describes that at all times, and it just cannot be done, not effectively, at least in my opinion. Somebody with a more technical brain than me might be able to, but it's not that important. Communication is important. Yes, Mickey.
I think Jolanda had their hand up first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, my little hand doesn't show very well on my wall. I know of several. You guys are all talking about you want new, younger callers, blah blah blah, and I have talked to a number of the younger callers, and I've even talked to people that have quit, and I've asked them why did you quit, and this is part of it, because I know of several women that they went to, and I've been one of them, that I've only gone to one caller school, and it was the 0 method, right? So I talked to one lady and I said, oh, I found this way that is so much easier to comprehend. It's corner boxes and partner lines. And she says, there is no way I am going back to square one and learning a new thing. And so she didn't even want to hear that there was a corner box. And I thought, there's no way that this lady is then going to be able to communicate with the 1P, whatever you guys call it. And then all of this is based on male callers. So an opposite lady box, it's all from the male perspective. So the women have to translate. You guys still, with all the meetings you have had, and if you are wanting to have female callers, you still have a language that's totally based on the male perspective. What happened to an opposite box? Why does it have to be an opposite lady, right? Does it have to have a gender necessarily in certain cases? I know of younger people that have been trained by somebody that was using 1P, and then when they hear that there's now corner boxes, they said, well, there's no use going to these meetings because we can't, like, it's like, come on, get a language that works. Roz and I have spent so much time learning all these 3 languages or 4 languages, whatever is out there at the moment, to learn how to communicate with all of you, right? I mean, I like to socialize. I want to talk to all the different, what I call the different generations. But I mean, what you guys just did in the last couple of hours is exactly what the new callers are saying. You guys, that's one of the reasons I want to learn how to learn terminations effectively, and my old-fashioned checkers, not only for the neurological pathways that you develop using this, but because this is a common language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's only my opinion.
No, you're absolutely correct, Yolanda. In the text document I wrote, for lady callers, there's often the tendency to use a reference girl and her partner on the left, but the principle of this is exactly the same. Unfortunately, as you very clearly pointed out, the terminology has not been translated accordingly. It's a lot of extra work for lady callers to adapt to the system, and most don't. They either accept or they walk away, or they just keep their the way they do it to themselves, and it only comes up when they're talking with other lady callers. I wish there was. I know in mental imaging they're starting to do a lot more towards how it works from the lady's perspective and how it moves over. Unfortunately, most of it is written, and as Daryl was saying, they're not going to go back and translate all this documentation that's out there to change all the terminology. That would be a ridiculous waste of effort.
I'm not sure they won't.
Well, the thing is, I was in I was in a mental image group, and I pointed this out, and then the guy said, but it really isn't that hard to translate. So I encouraged them that we changed the person that we were following from a male to a female dancer. And all of the guys, after a couple of minutes, said, hold on, this is too tough to do to have to translate it to somebody else. We're used to doing it from the male perspective. We can't do this. Let's switch it back to the guy. And so but you're expecting the female dancer, because we dance already backwards, like in round dancing and stuff like that, to just keep on doing it, right?
The principle of it is take a
Yolanda?
room full of people. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Daryl. I think I cut you off there.
Yolanda, as far as the mental image, from the lady's perspective, you can follow whoever's in the number one lady's position after the setup and follow her all the way around. The same setups for the ladies as they are for the men. So if an Alaman left is an Alaman left for a man, it's an Alaman left for a lady. The only difference is you're going to have to take whoever is in that number one lady's position after the setup. If you say 4 ladies chain 3/4, okay, every man's going to have his corner. Don't worry about that. Just say we chain 3/4. I'm going to be set up for an Alaman 2, and just follow whoever's in the number one lady's position as if that was who was there to begin with. Take her to the 2, which is going to be what? Star through, pass through, right and left through, pass through. You can follow her as easily as a man can follow a man. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, but
It's very simple.
Yeah, but the
but
terminology that you're going to use when you're talking in the mental image system, you're going to talk about which of those 4 spots is your Alaman spot, and if it's and it's the spot that if you took the head pair and a squared set and you just had them step into the middle and you had the sides face, so you have a line facing, right? So it's the number 4 lady and the number 1 man and his partner and her corner, right? That's the line. Those four positions there correspond to spots on the floor, and you're going to dance whoever you're following, like the number 1 lady, for example, back to that spot facing in the appropriate direction for the Alaman left or the right and left brand, and then you're going to call it. And so, but when you're talking to people about it, the spot that you start on, your initial Alaman spot that you go to, if you don't do any, when you do different calls, it can move it around. Many of the calls do not move the spot around; they just move the dancer around onto this or off of the spot. But the spot is going to be a different spot depending on whether it's a man or a woman. So again, you have a terminology problem, because if you say, it's on spot number 2, well, yeah, no, for the girl, she starts on spot number 3. So you still have, even though the system works and you can follow whoever you want.
That's why they call it mental images, because you're not following them any place except up here.
Right, but
Yolanda, I will talk with you
this-
later about that if you want
still have a
to.
terminology.
Guido's been trying to squeeze in.
Yeah, I was just waiting for Chris to finish, and I was going to go to Guido.
Yeah, I'm just saying that even in mental image, there's a little bit of a term. It's not a huge deal, but there is a little bit of a terminology problem, and to expect whether it's easier for the girl, a lady caller, to follow the boy or the girl, that would be just up to the individual. But if you follow the lady, it'll be a little bit different, and there'll be a little bit of a terminology confusion that just one more little thing to work around. So it's not it. So yeah, it works, but it's pretty good, but it's not all peaches and roses. And to have somebody follow the other person actually does require them to work really hard, because in their head they're used to following themselves on the floor, and that's what they're imagining. And so anyway,
you're absolutely right, Chris.
Yolanda's not off base on that.
No, you're right, Chris, and Yolanda's right as well. It does translate one spot over. How you follow it, the terminology, the system works for both the male and the female. Unfortunately, most of these are written for men, by men, and because ladies can adapt a lot easier than men can adapt, we tend to overlook it. That is very slowly changing, and there's been a lot more. I know, Yolanda, you've got a women in calling group, and you go through this as part of your discussion. I think as part of every meeting that you get to. It is slowly changing, so that both systems are both perceptions, not systems, it's the same system, are being presented. But we're a long way from being there yet, the same as we're a long way from coming up with standard. What I liked about this is how, Chris, how you described the setups, Daryl, how you described the setups where they were, how Yolanda. I noticed none of you used other than a quick corner box, you were describing how they got there to see where the dancers were. That's what the FASR state is about, to say, do you understand where you're at? And you did exactly what is necessary, saying, if I did this, okay, so you know where I'm at? Yolanda would say, yes, great. You've described FASR perfectly. Terminology wasn't relevant to that description. Guido, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Generally, dancing is always defined historically from the man's point of view. And well, in square dancing, it really doesn't matter if you follow a man or a lady in general, unless you're trying to do a singing call. It's a lot more difficult to do a corner or right hand lady progression if you follow the lady, because you have to move it, you have to move her to a different spot.
You understand that?
Yeah, because the boys always get home to their original position.
Singing call, the men are static, the women are moving. So to follow one lady, she has to move. You have to take that perception from 4 different locations instead of one location.
Generally, it really doesn't make a difference. No matter how you call it, corner box, 0 box, box 1-4, or whatever, in whatever area you've learned to define a square, it's always the same. It doesn't matter if you start with the heads, if you start with the sides. It doesn't matter if you start with, if you look at the boys, or if you look at the girls, if you have an H and through formation, everybody in sequence and everybody's facing his or her corner, you're in a 0 box or a corner box. That really doesn't matter. The problem starts when you try to have a certain form of progression in the square. Then it will become a little bit more difficult. And this is what Chris was saying. When you look at boy number 1, his element left spot, when he has his partner in his hand, is on the outside of the square, having his partner. At his element left spot number 2 is having his number 2 lady. And element left spot 3 is having his number 3 lady. This is what you have when you call head square through 4. The element left spot 1 is when you call side square through 4. And the 4th element left spot is when he has his number 4 lady on his hand. So it's much more difficult if you follow the ladies, because then you have to translate a lot more than if you just follow the boy. This is not saying that you follow the ladies when he goes in choreography, or if you follow the boys when he goes into choreography. But resolving the square in certain situations is easier when you follow the boys. When you just go to the 0 box, corner box, it really doesn't matter.
Hang on,
as soon as you deviate,
just a second, Daryl.
Yes, Yolanda.
No, hang on for just a second. I just
Whoever,
we're
anybody. Oh, somebody
Sorry,
ahead of me?
Yeah, just hang on. I just wanted to say we're almost well, we've pretty much put the discussion. If there's a take-home message for you to take from today's session, is terminology is about communication. If the terminology is not clear, use words that are clear to promote that communication and understanding. Especially if you are an experienced caller and you're mentoring new callers, use the basics of what is the standard communication for today but don't try and confuse them by saying 5L1P, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because it's just going to bury them. There's so much more stuff about formation, arrangement, sequence, and relationship that has nothing to do with the name that you give it. How you use it is what's important. And that's the take-home message. Communicate clearly and effectively and try and keep it simple for new callers to learn, for new dancers to learn, and to mentor other callers is what's important. Don't get hung up on the technicalities, because you'll get lost in the technicalities and lose the entirety of the message. So that's the take home. FASAR is about a starting point to facilitate communication. And if the description doesn't work, say it another way. And you guys have all proved that very, very effectively. I'm going to go to Daryl, and then I've got Mickey, because we're seeming to digress into a bit of mental image and a bit of following dancers around the floor, which is a great discussion, but it's back off topic. Go ahead, Daryl.
With what you said, all this change in terminology is Caller Lab committee make work. That's all it is. Now, back to the mental image. Roz, if I were to say heads, now from the lady's position, heads, star through, pass through, right and left through, would you know where you are as the head lady? Head, star through, pass through, right and left through. You're in a right-hand lady box out of sequence if you're going to go with the terminology, right?
Mhm.
Or excuse me, you'll be in sequence with the right and left through, wouldn't you? Star through, pass through, right and left through.
I know where I am.
If I said that you're in an Alaman 1 position, do you use mental image?
No,
Oh,
I did
okay.
get
Let's-
confused with,
now,
I got
man.
confused with Alaman 1, Alaman 2, Alaman 3, Alaman 4 from a woman's perspective.
Now, from the lady's perspective,
Yeah.
you know where that right-hand lady box in sequence is. And if I say that's Alaman 1, and I told you that Alaman 2 from there is just a pass-through, Alaman 3 is a trade by from an Alaman 2. Alaman 4 is a pass-through from an Alaman 3. So they're all lined up 1, 2, 3, 4, going across that grid. All right.
Okay.
Now, beyond that, everything is set up. If you're going to set up for an Alaman 1, everybody has to have the opposites. Oh, we're going to do this, huh? Okay,
well,
so just start with the 4 ladies chained straight across, if you would, please.
I got to interrupt just for a second. So what Daryl is showing you here is he's describing it with a lot of information that tells you what's going on, like, in sequence, and you have this person.
No, I'm not telling. Let me finish, Chris. You're going to get your chance, all right?
When you're actually using the mental image system,
Oh, just
you
a
never
minute.
think about any of
Just
those.
hold on.
Chris,
Hold
hang
on,
Let
Chris.
Daryl finish, and then we'll get you up there.
I'm talking to Russ, not you, all right? Now, the setup, regardless of what you see on the screen there, we say 4 ladies chain will set up for an Alaman 1. Now, if you do a heads, now follow, imagine yourself as the number 1 lady where the number 3 lady is standing now. This is a mental image thing. Make that your mental image, that whoever's there is you. Head, star through. Thank you. Pass through. Right and left through. And Alaman 1. Now you're this one that's number 3 lady over here.
Yep.
Is that where you were in your head? You
Yes.
followed? Okay,
Yes.
well, you've got your Alaman left there. Now square your set again. Now this just series of setups and get outs is all it is. All right, for an Alaman 2, 4 ladies chain 3/4. Now basically the 2 is saying the number 1 man has when he gets in the grid, he's going to have the number 2 lady. Just forget all that. You're looking at that number 4 lady that's standing in the number 1 lady's position. Follow her. Heads, star through, pass through, right and left through. She's standing in the number 1 position, isn't she? No. That's her over there. Yeah. That's where your element 1 was when she was on the outside facing a pass through. Do a pass through. I'm sorry, didn't mean to rush you. There's your element left. You see that? It was just a pass through away from where the 1 was. Okay, square them up again.
One of the things that gets confusing is when you say an Alaman left position, people think that that's a position I can call an Alaman left from. That's not the way it works. Not all the time.
Could you call an Alaman left where we were?
You could, but you'd be in the wrong spot.
Yes. But that's what she was looking for, was the Alaman left, wasn't it? Well, it worked. And it's working across this grid, the same direction, 1 step at a time. Now, we can go through the same process here, and you can actually follow that number 1 lady all the way, head, star through, pass through, centers pass through, sorry. Right and left through. She's standing in the number 1 position, pass through. Do a pass through. She's standing in the number 2 position. Trade by. She's in the number 3 position, and you can do your element left. Can't you?
Yes.
So it was just a trade by away from the 2. They're all on the same side of that grid, all facing the same direction. What's the difference? It's a setup to begin with. Square your set.
Are you always taking care of the ladies or watching a lady follow with the mental image? You just have to vary the ladies and keep track of them. So this is an additional step instead of following 1 boy.
This is simple. This is simple setup to a simple get out. Now you can add modules on either end of that grid and get a huge dance if you want. Okay, we're going to set up for that Alaman 4. Let's have the, well, I could say, don't do it. I could say 4 ladies chain straight across, then 4 ladies chain 3/4. Let's just have the ladies chain 1/4, which will give us exactly the same thing. All right, 4 ladies chain 1/4.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll do that, but I'll try. I'll be darned.
Okay, we're there. All right, now the number 1 man, he's going to have the number 4 lady. That's why we call it a number 4 Alaman left. But as far as you're concerned, that Alaman left is just a pass through away from where the Alaman 3 was. Now we can go through the whole thing with the star through, pass through, right and left through, pass through to the 2, trade by to the 3, and or we can, okay, there you go. This fast, isn't it? Right and left through, you're in the 1. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you're standing in the 1 position. Pass through, trade by. That's the number 2. We trade by to 3 and pass through. You're standing in the 4. Russ, could you do an Alaman left there?
Yes.
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 Yes. 2 Alaman lefts are in the trade by formation, 2 are in the box formation. Once you get in the grid, that's all there is. There aren't any more than that. So that's all you have to deal with. But if you can track whoever is in that number 1 lady's position after, track her as if it's yourself after you do those setups. The first one was an opposite setup, 4 ladies chain straight across. The next one was a 4 ladies chain 3/4. The next one was no ladies chain. And the last one was 4 ladies chain and 4 ladies chain 3/4. Now study that. Push your checkers around use terminations, look at it. Like I say, they're all on the same side of the grid, all facing the same direction. Can your technical zeros work? Sure, as long as everything is equal. All right. Ladies' chains, they destroy that. But with your invert and rotates, you can get a ton of dancing out of this. Your modules, you can get a ton of dancing. And let's face it, if you can say 4 ladies chain straight across and head couples, let's see, head couples square through 4. I know that if I start through, pass through, right and left through, I could be in an Alaman 1, but I'm going to get there a different way. So I might say heads, right and left through, star through, pass through, circle 4, halfway, veer to the left, couples circulate, chain down the line, and slide through it. You'd be standing in the number 1 position, all ready for that Alaman left, because that's what you set up for. But the variety is there. But if you're worried about the get out, just make sure, like in any mental image perception of this, you zero out any partner changes. You have a flutter wheel, do a recycle, or 2 ladies chain, or whatever it's going to take to get it back to the same partner arrangement you had. Then take them to that geographic location in your head where that number 1 is, call your Alaman left. Don't watch the dancers, it'll get you into trouble. But if it's going to be mental image, you keep it mental image, and this will work for you every time. Now, that way you can track the number 1 lady position through all of your Alaman lefts. Keep it simple. Don't make it difficult. Keep it simple.
That is the principle to every aspect of calling, is to keep it simple and start simple. I've got Chris first with his rebuttal to Daryl. I'll call it rebuttal because I'm not sure if it was or wasn't. So I think you're complimenting each other. You're just saying it different. And then Mickey. So Chris.
Yeah, no, it's not a rebuttal. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's not a rebuttal. I'm just trying to clarify a couple of things about what he was showing you there, just to make sure that that you don't get a certain wrong ideas that people often get. So he described, to illustrate for you, where the people were going and who they had next to them or whatever, and all that stuff. When you're actually doing the mental image system, you don't think about any of those things at all. I don't care what the sequence is. I don't care where the partner is. I don't care with anything, nothing. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is, where is the designee, either the man I'm tracking or the lady I'm tracking, whoever you want to track. And then the other thing that I keep track of is which of those 4 spots is my target spot, or my so-called Alaman spot, if you happen to be facing the correct direction for Alaman. If you do a U-turn back, you could do a right and left grand, of course, same thing. But anyway, wherever one of those 4 spots is currently the active target, Alaman, whatever you want to call it, the spot that you got to go to. Some calls will change which spot that is. And ladies chain is a good example that he showed you there, of moving. First the target spot was here, but if you do the 2 ladies chain, and or rather the 4 ladies chain and the 4 ladies chain 3/4, then it moves it over 1. And if you do a 4 ladies chain, it moves it over 2, and so forth. There's rules for calls that change which of the spots it's going to be. There's a rule that goes with that particular call. Most calls don't change the spot. Of all the calls, most of them don't do any of that. And of the ones that do, there's a very regular rule that applies to all of them, basically. And so that's also an easy thing to keep track of. But you never actually think about where what the sequence is or anything. There are some observations you can make, which is that it happens if you're on one of those 4 spots. If you're on that side of the square where the spots are, then the man's in sequence. And if you haven't altered something about the spots, then everybody's in sequence. So, but that's just a curiosity. You never think about it when you're doing the mental image. It's really just about following the one dancer around and ignoring all the others in that sense, and then putting the person on the spot you want and calling Alaman left. The one wrinkle that I didn't mention that you might hear about is this X's and O's thing, and
Yes, I've heard that.
when you're ready, the spots also the spot starts out in an O, and you're only ever worrying about one spot, and it can be either that spot can be either in an X state or an O state, and usually it's in an O state. And I'm not going to go into all the rules for how it works, but if you do certain calls, like Daryl alluded to, canceling calls. Most calls don't need to get canceled. Some calls that do something that I'm not going to go into will change the spot from an X to an O and maybe move it in one direction or another. And then you can cancel it with a corresponding call. And like I said, of the calls that do the changing, which is not most of the calls, but like ladies chain or two ladies chain, for example, is what we call an X call, and that will move the spot and change it to an X, and then you can do another ladies chain, and which is an X call, and it'll move the spot back to where it was and change it back into an O. So you keep track of that when you get a little bit fancier. But in terms of who's where and all that jazz, I don't ever think about it. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, believe it or not, is Daryl was half joking when he said, "Don't watch the dancers because they'll screw you up." But really, when you're mental image calling, you really do watch the dancers because you need the timing information, and of course you need to make sure that they're all still dancing and everything. So, but I don't watch but I don't watch where people are going so much. I just watch in my case where that one guy that I care about, where he is. You can do some tricks in your head where the guy that you're tracking might change identity on the floor. You thought you were tracking the number one man, but if you do certain weird things, it can be that suddenly you're tracking the number three guy. But again, that's advanced jazz that you don't need to worry about until way down the line. But yeah, so it's really just you track the number one guy, and if you think in your head square through 4, and let's say we have a squared set, everybody is standing on their, or the heads in particular are standing on their the spot that's going to be their target Alaman spot. You go head square through 4. We all know you can call Alaman left there. That's because the man or the woman, the head man or the hand, or for that matter, the sides, you can do it on the other axis as well. You could track the sides if you're more comfortable with that. They're standing on their spot, ready to go. And that's the kind of tracking that you do. You don't care about, where anybody else is at all. Just the one person, that's all you got to keep track of. Anyway, I'm done, I hope.
Thank
I
you.
think we're going to have probably about a 400-hour session on mental imaging coming up, starting from the basics. But as with any system, start small, get your basics down, and build from there. Mickey, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to ask you to help me out with the terminations. And we just need the regular colors, the 4 colors, the couples.
I don't know how to set them by default quickly, so I do it the old-fashioned way.
That's okay.
I choose these colors because these are the colors of my checkers.
We need a yellow.
Yeah.
I thought that was yellow.
Okay. Okay, now could we have the heads lead to the right and circle to a lane?
You want the axis off or on?
No, on, please. Very important.
Can I just make a comment before you make your point here, Mickey? For those
Pardon?
of you that, just a quick comment on termination. For those of you that have not noticed, there's now a count here down at the bottom, you remember how it always gave the total count and it never told you? So if you're doing a sequence, if I'm here, that's square, watch, I get the first movement, gives me the count where I am, and it'll walk you through. So the counts have now been put on there. Oh, that was a thing that Brad has done. Sorry, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, go and the bend the line, please. So now what would we have on the phaser?
Partner lines.
Partner lines, right. The formation are lines facing in, right? The arrangement is zero ranged. We're normal. The sequence is everybody's in sequence, and the relationship is with partner, correct? Now I'm coming back to that orientation occupation thing because I'm not sure whether that was understood right or whether it is the way that I understand it. Now we can move those dancers, like taking a look at couple number one. Okay, so they're in the right quadrant in the bottom, and we said we're in a partner line. Now what we could have is move them to the other quadrant to the left. Okay, everybody past the ocean. Girls trade. Swaying through. Boy run. Couples circulate. And bend the line. So this routine we can always use to move them from one quadrant to the other quadrant. And what we have right now is we have the same thing. We have formation is the line. The arrangement is zero. The sequence status we're all in. We got relationship with partner. So did we change anything?
What we changed, this was the difference between orientation and occupation. Orientation describes what you're changing now, which is the actual quadrant.
No. That's not correct. Let me finish this. What we moved is the occupation because we're standing on a different spot. But our orientation is still the same. We're still looking north-south. Okay. So this
I
is
understand
thing.
that this is exactly what I was saying before, Mickey, because the way they've described it, orientation deals with the quadrants around the square. You're oriented based on your position from the initial quadrant that you're in. Occupation deals with calling something specific. For instance, if I said heads, partner trade, I'm now talking about the heads occupying specific spots on the floor. It's counterintuitive and it's silly, but that's the official way they describe it.
No, I'm not sure.
And that's why it gets confusion.
The occupation orientation, and I think this is a misunderstanding, goes to the total phaser. I mean, we have not changed the phaser, but we have changed the spots we're standing physically on the floor. And this is a change of occupation. Okay. Now our orientation is still the same as we were over on the right-hand quadrant. So our orientation did not change, but the occupation changed. Now please call a bend the line. Now we still have the same phaser. We did not change our occupation because we're still in the same quadrant, but we definitely faced our orientation. Okay, and this is important for get outs if we're going to get home, like a pass through, wheel and deal, center sweep, a quarter, because there are only two possibilities. All right, to set it up correctly to do so. Please pass through. Bend the line.
Okay, you can
Pass through. Bend the line. Okay, now calling a pass through and a wheel and deal center sweep a quarter. This is one of only two positions. I mean, imagine we could have four quadrants. These are four possibilities. and we have 2 facing directions we could go. So it makes a total of 8. And out of the 8 different O's we have as a possibility without changing the phaser, this is one of the 2 where you could call pass through, and the wheel and deal with center sweep a quarter. Let's try it. Pass through, wheel and deal, and center sweep a quarter and back away, and there you are. So therefore, the OO is important if you want to know, but it has to do with occupating the spots in the quadrants as a total without changing the phaser. And the orientation is like going with a bend the line to change the orientation, the facing orientation. The same thing you could do with ocean waves. It's much more complicated to set it up than with lines, but this is what we can have.
What I'm calling right here. When they describe, like, and this is what I was saying about the orientation occupation, I'm in total agreement with you. Orientation should be reflective of the way you're facing in relation to your original positioning on the floor in the direction you're facing. When they talk about orientation in the initial description, which is going back early 80s and whatnot, Rich, I think he's got it published, what they were talking about. When we talk about occupation and orientation, the orientation here is they've moved to the left 1 quadrant. The occupation is I now have the sides in the head position, the heads in the side position. And the occupation, if I called heads star through, that's what termination reads, but your dancers would do, I would direct original heads. I'm talking about occupation of a different position. The way you're saying it makes absolute sense, and I agree with you. The way it's described, as you go back through the research and the paperwork that describes orientation and occupation, if I didn't have those heads back away, hang on, undo. Where's my cursor? Undo, undo. And I now say heads that's occupation. That's the difference between the static square and the way it reads it. And again, this is where it gets confusing if you're trying to describe something with a phasor state or a phasru state or an exact state, is you have to be very clear. And what you're saying is clear. Orientation is the direction we're facing relative to our starting position. And our occupation is where we are on the floor. But when you get things like that, that's where it crosses over again, back to the old explanation. And as our choreography becomes more complex, so does trying to fit all of the pieces into one peg, because it doesn't always work that way.
Mickey, the way I work with that setup you had with lines, I always think of it as my far right quadrant is where my get out is for your pass through wheel and deal in the center sweep a quarter. As you rightly point out, you've still got a zero line of some sort. But when I think of quadrants, I think of in relation to the caller rather than the square, which helps me as a sight caller. Because if I think, oh, I've got him in the far right quadrant, I'm okay, away I go. And that's the way I handle the quadrants to some extent.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this session, because I knew it would be convoluted. It's one of the main reasons why I took that
Mel?
expression. And it's not mine that says, you know, from a zero box, if you call a zero, they're still in a zero box, but they're not in a zero box. That long one, that's not mine. That's one I stole. But it's very important because it expresses that even though that is technically correct, it's extremely confusing. And the idea
Mel, could you
is
do
to
a
make
pass
this
through from
simple.
where they are?
Sure. Centers pass through.
Yeah. And if termination would do it, a reverse circle to a line just to get into that formation.
I don't know if it will do that or not.
If not, then just go for a circle to a line.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's
Right
at
and left
A1.
through. Now here's exactly what Alan said, and this is the second variation where only it would work with the home get out, column pass through, wheel and deal, center sweep a quarter. What is the same with we had before is that we have the number one couple in the upper quadrant and in the far right, as Alan said. If you may want to let them dance now with a pass through. Wheel and deal. The center sweep a quarter and they're back away and they're home.
This is where if you remember back when I was saying the exact occupation and orientation are important because calling has become a lot more than moving the dancers, getting to a corner resolution, Alaman left, right, and left grand promenade, however long it takes to get home. The FAS-RU or the FAS-R description, which gives you the orientation and the occupation, is establishing a point to set up for a specific get out. So in that case, that would have been a partner line because it's in sequence. The occupation, the orientation is in the far right quadrant. How you explain that, I'm not overly familiar with that, but for me, that would be top right-hand quadrant or out. And then your orientation is standard because we're still facing either the same heads or the sides. Everybody's still facing the sides are facing head walls. Heads are still in their position, and the orientation is.
If you check home get outs, then you always will only have 2 out of 8 will work.
Yep.
Yeah.
There or there.
Like you could go head square through 4. Swing through. Center straight. Usually I build it up with everybody circulate once and a little step. But it's easier to see now for everybody if we just keep it from the corner. What we have is a ocean wave defacer, which is an half ocean wave. We got the boys in the center, girls on the outside. The arrangement is half. The formation is an ocean wave, a right-handed ocean wave. The sequences were all in sequence, and the relationship is with corner. Now, if you would call a half circulate minus a step and face in, everybody would be home. This would only work from this position, yeah? So, or if we just call a step through, like coming around, yeah, everybody do half of a circulate, a little step more, face in, and you're home. This is one position which it would work. The other one, if you square your sets, would be sides square through 4.
All right, but your side ladies are having a little bit of trouble with that extend.
Yeah. But usually it's a 1 circulate and a step, and then everybody face in and not now, no. We were starting again side square through from static square.
They got there eventually.
Okay, once again, swing through. Boys straight. Now this is just to set it up so we can see. Now it's the same thing. What we got again is the formation is a right-handed ocean wave. The arrangement is half, and sequences we're all in sequence. Relationship is with the corner, so it hasn't changed. We're still the same quadrant, but the orientation has changed. Yeah, because we're looking and we're now looking instead of east-west side facing, we're looking north-south, head facing. And we could call the same thing, which is, as I do it now, a half circulate minus a one step, and we're all facing in, and there we are. And then where everybody's home, or a step through facing, heads do it twice. This only works from those two setups. We have 8 setups where we could set this ocean wave, this phaser up in 4 different quadrants with 2 different facing directions, orientations, either north-south or west-east. So there are 8 possibilities, but only those 2 would work for this type of get out. So if you want home get outs, then you always got to make sure that you pick the 2 out of those 8. And that's where the OO comes in and is important.
And for me, that's a near left. Yeah. So I just think near left. I don't worry about this OO business. That's all a bit too esoteric.
Same thing with the term exact. If I say a corner box, we could all agree that this is a corner box. And you'll see this written in a lot of material. A get out to home would be
8 chain 4.
Hang on.
Yeah. 8 chain 4 and on the 4th hand, right?
That should be a get out to home because that's the way it's written in the book. The problem with the Fazar state being corner box, it doesn't give that. And of course, we all know that this is not home. As opposed to I did this is a corner box exact, or head as if the heads did a square through. They're all still relatively in their same position, using that exact same thing. Out of your corner, your home. It's along the same, corner box exact has a specific meaning. It means either a head square through or a side square through. A partner line exact is heads lead right circle to a line or sides lead right circle to a line. If it says exact, it means orientation and occupation are not relevant. There's only 2 ways you can get there. And if you're setting up to home, those are the other 2 that Mickey's talking about. Orientation and occupation, they apply. If it's not exact, the other 2 will apply. And they're designed specifically for one reason, and that's to get you to say, what comes next? This piece of choreography will get you to this exact location to do this exact outcome every time, either to home or to a right and left grand to home or whatever. And that's where the difference are. It only applies at a 2. Exact applies to 2. Orientation, occupation applies to the other 2. You look totally confused, Roz.
I think quadrants is an easier way to understand it, but
it is. And this is where crams and all of this is starting to come in, because it deals with the relationships and it deals with where you are on the ground. And it's not worried about, who's going to do what. For me personally, when I'm teaching newer callers, this kind of stuff, I say, don't worry about that. This is 5, 6, 7 years down the road. There's so much that is important. For experienced callers, it's very important when you're mentoring new callers that you start them with the basics. You don't have to know how to name every Fazar state. You do have to understand the basics of formation. You do have to understand the basics of arrangement. You do have to understand the basics of sequence. And you do have to understand relationships, because that's how you're going to move the dancers and how you're going to eventually resolve the square. But to be able to name every one of those beyond corner box, partner line, cross the street box, right-hand box, if you will, or lead right box, you really don't need to know it. If you say in sequence or out of sequence, that's only for resolving. How do I resolve from here? And it's the same with the orientation and occupation. It's only for achieving a specific goal from a specific point. And that's later on. I'd be more concerned with newer callers to say, can you move the dancers comfortably and effectively around the floor, and then eventually figure out how to get them home, whatever system you use. That's
on the other hand, it's a useful tool as well to get variation, to move them from one quadrant to the other one, and still having control with still knowing in what phaser you are in. Yeah.
Yep.
And keeping the phaser. So this is a task of what I have in my color schools, is to move them through all 8 positions, yeah, with a routine. And this brings in a variety, in their column.
When you do this, Mickey, they do have at that point, though, generally the basics of formation management? Would they have?
Yeah.
Okay, would they have the basics of call analysis? I know if I do a right and left through, it does this. I know if I do a square through, it does that. They would have those basics down. So this is what I'm saying. The next step, before I would get into the quadrants, I would get them into the invert and rotate, so that they see how it moves up and down across the grid. But I'm not worried about them understanding that I'm in this quadrant, I can do this to get home resolution. That will come. But once they have the basics of moving around.
No, it's not from the home resolution. That's one benefit you get out of it. But to be able to move from one quadrant to the other and change orientation, which may be interesting and necessary to achieve a goal in there, be it as a side color or when preparing something at home, or preparing modules. Yeah, then you got to know how to move them.
Like, for instance, knowing this, how to move it from here to here, so that I've got boy facing a girl, or even here in this, but I'm swinging facing this direction for a singing call to give me a 3/4 promenade instead of a full promenade. Knowing how to do that is where I go before I get into that. And moving them into those different quadrants is a stepping stone to getting to using FASRU, if you will, the FASR with the orientation and occupation, for the next step in evolution of calling. And that's your surprise get outs, because before that, it's a module. And even after that, generally, it's a module. Here's a neat little get out that I know from a 1P, 2P line in the top right-hand quadrant, or in the far right quadrant, or the far left quadrant. You know, that's usually how it explains. I know, Alan, you do this a lot when you're setting things up. You'll say from a partner line in the top left-hand quadrant. That's your explanation to say, okay, I've got the number 1 couple on the top left facing in, and everybody's in sequence. It's just a way of referencing. That is an absolutely correct FASR explanation as far as I'm concerned, because I know what he means. He knows what he means. And then I can look at, and my concentration is going to be back. Okay, I know where the dancers are. What's he going to do next? And at that point, he starts going off, and I usually lose him.
But what's interesting is that if you have a 0 box exact or a corner box exact, and you do a technical 0 that rotates 1/4, invariably you're going to have not a right and left grand and promenade, but you're going to have just a right and left grand in your home. So just using just that knowledge without actually, as Mickey says, being able to move them around to the other quadrants. And so for me, if I know I've got them opposite quadrant, it's an 8 chain 4, and on the last one slide through, or something like that. Just so that you're quickly getting to get home, get outs without really trying to engineer them so much,
And that's where the knowledge comes. And as Daryl said it earlier, and as Mickey has said, start small, get the foundations, and then slowly build on it. Mental imaging is one of those strange, weird, and wonderful concepts, because if I do heads pair off, just as an example, and I take all the gender and all the colors away, logically you would think, okay, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. Or is it that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4? But that's not the way it works. And matching the person, your X, putting them on the other side. Okay, I've changed this. If I'm in the center, I've changed it from a 1 to a 3. If I've done an X and I have to cancel this over there, that's where it gets really convoluted. And it's hard to follow if you've danced another system without completely letting go of what you know before you learn that. It's hard to set that aside. But if you're able to do that, it is a powerful tool in your square dance toolbox, because you can begin to rely on it for a lot more. And as Daryl said, you can do it, you can set it up and just follow that lady, set it up so that she's in that third position. And I know if I move her to a number 3, as long as I've got all my X's canceled, when she's in that number 3 spot, I can call an Alaman left. It comes that simple, but simple is hard unless you know how to get there.
Yeah, now, for example, taking this formation, we've got this 8 chain through formation. We got the sides on the outside paired, the heads in the middle, they have their opposite. There are only 4 possibilities by turning it for quarter, for quarter, for quarter. The other variations we said, because they're always 8, would be the heads on the outside paired with the sides in the middle, having their opposite on their hand, and then turn it again a quarter, quarter, and quarter. Those are the only 8 possibilities you have without changing the facer. Okay.
Yep.
And I think it can, correct me if I'm wrong, Roz, but earlier on when you were saying an Alaman 1 spot, you're looking, okay, that's a spot I can call Alaman left. So I should be able to call Alaman left here, Alaman 2, Alaman left. I could call an Alaman left depending on where the girls are, but they weren't in a relationship to call an Alaman left. That's not what they mean by an Alaman spot. What it means is when you move the dancers around, if you're tracking that lady and you put her in her Alaman 3 spot, everybody else would be resolved because of the X's and the O's. So if you keep in your mind which spot you have to take her to, you just move her to that spot.
Mickey's talking about variations of 8 where you're relying on number 3 Alaman spot.
Yeah.
So you're keeping the number 3 spot, but you're moving everybody around.
Right.
So, to demonstrate it from here, if you star through, pass through, bend the line, and slide through, you've obviously rotated that 1 quarter.
Well, not actually, because you got the sides on the inside.
Yeah, but you've inverted it. But for me, this is a right and left grand to home. But if you call it again, it takes you back to where you were.
So if you want to put Alaman left, right and left grand to home, not just a right and left grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I do, but I just wanted to clarify because some people are recording this.
So if you want to move it, keep going in the same direction, you need to star through and do a right and left through so that you keep going the same way you're going. Pass through.
That spot to that spot. Or the other way for the ladies.
Bend the line and a right and left through and then slide through again. So that you've put the box at now over on the far side. So here you've got, so you've moved it to the 3rd quadrant, if you like, thinking it that way, going clockwise. So interesting from here now is that the star through, pass through, bend the line, slide through is going to work, put you back home in your home quadrant. So you've done all 4 quadrants with only the knowledge of 1 technical, but just keeping yourself going the same direction around the square.
Yeah, but actually we now only had 4 out of 8. Okay.
Yes, I understand that, Mickey. Yeah, you're going to use it for the sides as well. Yeah.
Right.
But
interesting would be like to not change this facer now with always having the heads on the outside and then turning them quarter by quarter by quarter.
Yeah.
And this is a lot tougher than inverting if you have your modules. On the other hand, if you worked out your modules, it's not tough anyway in the one or the other direction.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Go ahead with what?
What you were saying.
Reverse the flutter center's wheel around. But because it's crowded in the center, I would not call that routine. Now you got to slide through again and pass through, then you got it.
Yeah, no, I was turning my alarm clock off.
And now this is the task which I always give my students, to work out a nice routine to then rotate 1/4, and everybody has to come up with something different. Yeah, and that's where the variety starts and the creativity comes in, and keep it simple, smooth flowing, and that builds up confidence as well, right? And it's a kind of a puzzle game they like. Yeah.
I would like to point out, like, I gave a presentation on communication. I used FASR as the example. The reason I used it is because it is one of those things that every caller uses and refers to. But in my opinion, I would say very few callers actually understand how to explain what it is they're saying. There's 4 pieces of information that need to be given. And depending on from there, if there's something else you want to say, like a get home resolution, there's 2 additional pieces of information that you need to give, be exact or orientation occupation. So that's what it is. And it's all about facilitating communication. It's all about starting small with your basic concepts, partner line, corner box, etc. Beyond that, communication is making sure you have understanding. And getting beyond that, especially for most new callers, and I would say probably most experienced callers, myself included, when you start getting into the technicalities of that, you hit overload probably about 20 minutes past the explanation of the basics. Once you hit that overload button, everything else is, I'm just following the choreography. I understand what you're doing, but I really don't understand what you're saying because it's not sinking anymore. The sponge is full. I got to squeeze some stuff out of it before I can soak in some more water. And that's a very, very common thing. So I stress this. If you're ever in a place to mentor new callers, teach new callers, or if you're a new caller, when you hit that point, say, I'm at that point. There's no shame in listening and following the conversation, but accept the fact that I'm at that point, right? Here's the point I stopped listening. We'll go back and we'll repeat the second half of this lesson another time, one-on-one or whatever. That's actually what Yolanda and I did last week about this. And I'm sorry if some of this was redundant, Yolanda. It probably makes a lot more sense than it did last week when we started the first time, or the week before when, but this is how long it takes. FASR is confusing. The choreography or the terminology we use as callers to communicate with each other is wide and varied. Even in the conversations we're having with each other, I noticed that other than the very, very basics, we don't use FASR descriptions to tell each other where they are, because we know that although 8 years ago, this is the standard that we as Caller Lab members all agreed to use, we're not going to use it because it's more confusing than it's worth. So don't get hung up on it. Remember the formation sessions? You got 22 basic formations that you may have to use up through plus. The rest of them fall in the category of who cares? What's the FASR state for this situation? For 90% of them, the FASR state is who cares? It's not that important. If I know where you're saying, I know where you're going. If I know where you're starting, I know what you want to do to get to where you want to go. And that's what communication's about. We do this with our dancers, but we never do it with our callers. Anyway, I want to say thank you to Mark. Thanks again, Mark, as always, for doing the sessions. We stopped the recording a little bit ago, so a lot of this discussion won't be on the video. The handout is the PowerPoint presentation and the note pages that go with that, but there is a lot of material, and I posted the FASR name changes, which is a single sheet PDF from Caller Lab. Again, I said that's 2014, 8 years ago. callers don't mind sudden change. Just give us 15 years notice. That's really all I can say. And by the time we do accept the change, chances are it will have changed again. Mickey, was it you that said maybe we need a new way of describing this stuff instead of trying to lock ourselves into the description? I think you're probably absolutely correct. But the reality is, in my opinion, FASAR, what the words mean is important. The names that go with it, not really that important if you understand what you're saying. So that's really it. I know we've ventured off from the presentation discussion quite a while ago, but the floor is open if anybody has something they want to discuss or throw it on the floor.
I'd like to offer for the beginners, or if they want to, that routine for rotating that square from an 8-chain through box, which is very simple. It's a swing through, boys run, bend the line, pass through, wheel and deal, centers pass through, and you can do it over and over again, and it's flowing, it's easy to follow, and brings a lot of variety in there. And it's either starting with the hits, and those makes 4.
What else did you want?
What did you do?
Sorry,
No boy straight, no boy straight.
Yeah, I'm gonna swing through.
Boy run.
I think my brain's on overload now.
Bend the line. Pass through, wheel and deal. Centers pass through. You can work any zeros now and then do the same thing over again. And once again, it rotates the square quarter without changing the phaser.
Just pasted that into the chat because we're not actually recording this. So I just pasted that.
And actually, I think this would be, most of the new callers have left, and I think this would be interesting for them to learn. I think it's at the end of a 3 or 4 hour presentation, it's not going to sink in the same way as at the beginning.
I was raising my hands like hell.
Yes.
Mickey. So next week you're going to be talking about rotate and invert and rotate, the difference and how to use them, correct?
Okay. Yeah, if you do that again, that sequence, and rotate it one more time.
Hang on, I got to put my cursor in, that's why.
Okay, now I'm given my bonus, okay? So now we got to see is just like the HN4 across the street. Yeah, for everyone, this would work as well if we would have the heads on the opposite side, couple number 1, and have the sides in the middle. Would be another one. Now swing through. Boy straight. Now remember, we had that phaser with being home in the lower quadrant, where we said just a bit of a circulate and phase in. Now this is the real thing. You call an all-8 circulate.
Oh, you're gonna okay. Yep.
And
this will work. Circulate twice.
What is it you want to do there, Mickey? Because the Taminations doesn't do it all the way.
Well, we need 2 circulates anyway. It's going to be circulate twice and a step and face in, and you're home. Termination doesn't work, but dancers will make it, and it's a real nice get out.
Damn it.
And so in combination with that rotation, you got variation, you got total control of it.
I hit reset. I typed reset. He's changed a couple of things in there. I wanted to put that in brackets, but it just picks it up. So I didn't actually paste that in, but that's the sequence that Mickey was saying earlier on. Swing through boys trade from a corner box is just a step ahead. And if you can change the quadrants to the other side, as in doing an 8-chain-4, swing through boys trade, step ahead, right and left grand, you're home.
And
Or-
it's better to have the two circulates ahead, because that's when they move, when they walk, and then they'd rather be home instead of trying those little, just a little step or whatever. I wouldn't do that. This was just for showing how to get home. But the real one would be with the two circulates.
Mickey, I still think it would be valuable, especially for new
Yes.
callers, learning the power of rotating and the power of invert and rotating. And I know you give
Okay.
that, I know you give that presentation as a presentation to a lot of the ECTA callers. So how's your English?
Mine?
Yeah. I've heard you gave a great presentation on that, but I think it was in German. So how's your English?
Well, I do it in English as well. I do all the conversation in English.
I know.
Yeah.
In other
No, I
words,
can-
I'm trying to rope you into a presentation here, Mickey.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm more
I
than
was-
willing to do so. But give me time after the Colorado convention, because I got a lot of things and panels to prepare for that, and committee and
worries.
meetings. So I'm right now I'm overloading with work, and but
no
yes, I would be pleased to give a presentation, definitely.
Those are the type of tools, in my opinion, that are a lot more important than knowing the name of every single formation or every Fazar state. Those are important dance manipulation tools.
Yeah, and I have another one which I would like to present to you. Got to get and talk to you, which is what's happening. That's the what I call what's happening, and how do I go there? Which is more or less know your call information management, which I think is very important.
Well, I'll be looking forward to those presentations.
Okay.
When I'm not in brain overload anymore.
Well, I
thank you,
guess I
everybody,
would be
for-
starting.
Yeah, I'm a
Well,
bit
thank you.
overloaded now.
What was that, Rose?
The same as Yolanda, I'm a bit overloaded now.
Yeah. It's very easy. This, like, what I'm always amazed at is, and I think you hit the nail on the head last week, Yolanda, when you said everybody talks about Fazar, and they give this Fazar, it's like a 30-minute presentation. You're expected to understand it, but FASR, they never say it in that order. They never explain it in that order. They tell you, what's the arrangement, but that's always the second one. And what's, is it Fazar? Is it ARFs? Because that's the way it's always explained. But Fazar rolls off the tongue because they are very important things. You have to know the formation to know what to call. You have to know the arrangement. So, where it is. That's the order you need to assess them to a call. But we never explain it that way.
Well, I just find that as I'm talking to different callers, it's like I'm having to, instead of learning one language, I'm learning 4 so far. Then there's certain calls, like if I'm talking to Bob, I talk in one way, and if I'm talking to Daryl, or at least when I'm talking about what I'm hearing is different languages, right? So I'm having to translate it in my head. Okay, so they're saying 0 boxes, so I have to translate corner boxes in my head and stuff. And depending on who I talk to, I have to translate. So it's it'd be nice if everybody just talked the same language, which is basically what this whole conversation was about.
We
You're
noticed
not,
that.
you're not the only one who's
In a nutshell.
you're not the only one who's translating. Everybody of us does.
And you hit it when you look at these kinds of things and you say different callers are going to approach it differently. Even this topic, which was only about one thing, and that's how we speak to each other. And Fazar, the numbers and the names are not that important, but you need to understand how it works to know why it's not that important. because that's the big thing that everybody stresses is FASR. FASR name is totally irrelevant in my opinion. Being able to communicate where the dancers are, however you do that, is what's important. That said, there are commonalities. There are so many things that are so much more important on what we do that you shouldn't have to really translate this. But even in a presentation like this, you'll note that using Daryl as an example, Daryl is very, very into the symmetry, one quadrant, two couples, the mirror image, the diagonal symmetry. Bob, when he spoke, okay, well, what's the state for this? He's asking a legitimate question. So if I'm in a corner box and I do a flutter wheel, how would I describe that? Because I just call that, X and Y. But then another caller would say, okay, well, I'm hooked up on the choreography. That takes us to a different type of choreography. That takes to mental image. Well, how one person looks at mental image is different than how another person looks at mental image.
Yes.
And this is the same through every single aspect of us calling. It's a good thing that we all look at things differently with a different perspective, but it's also a bad thing because sometimes you try and impose your method or the way you look at things on somebody else when they see it completely different. For instance, ladies look at it from a different perspective than men do. And if you go to where they are, it's a lot easier to bring them to where you are rather than say, this is where I'm starting. If you don't like it, go away. Yeah. And unfortunately, if you don't like where I am, go away, method of explaining how to call has been dominant for way, way too long. My perception is the only right way. Wrong. The right way to call, the right way to do things is the one that works for you, that's clear for you to build up your tools. The best resolution method is the one that works for you. Once you learn that, then you got a place to start learning others. The best calling method.
And I've actually met a couple of young callers now, and they don't have any of this. So I was starting to say things like corner boxes, and they don't have corner box, they don't have zero box, they don't know any formations. They've just learned how to call, and it works for them. And I'm thinking, oh, so you mean you learn how to call without any of this?
But I'll bet you they know what a head square through box is, though, don't they?
No, they actually didn't. They had absolutely no, they've just learned square through 4 and then square through 4, and they know that after that they do this and this, but they have no formational communication at all.
And this is where, like in my opinion, this is where it would have been nice for me starting off. If I do a head square through, okay, I can dance, I can do a head square through, okay. Yeah, everybody's looking at their corner, okay. For ease of just understanding, we'll just call this a corner box from that one. Okay, so if I get to a corner box, just this is where I'm talking about. And you start there, you build from a starting point. You don't go anywhere else. I do another square through. Okay, I'm back here. If everybody turns in, okay, I'm in the corner box, everybody's looking out. So we're in a line, but we're all facing out. Let's call this lines facing out. We can slowly build up the formations. We can slowly build up, the relationship states. We can slowly build up is it boy on the left, girl on the right, so that it's starting from a common small point of reference and introduce the currently correct terminology, because as we all know with Caller Lab, things only change on days that end with the letter Y. And those newer callers aren't going to have to unlearn or relearn everything else.
But when I was first learning, and for, gosh, I don't know how many years after that, a lot, at least 5. When I was first learning, I heard people saying all these different little code words for different arrangements and positions and stuff, and so I'm a beginner caller, but I already am at the point where I understand what the formations are and how to move people around and all that stuff, and I could describe things in terms of call sequences if you like I usually mostly still do, because I think that's universal, right? Everybody understands what the calls are. Now beginners don't, I guess, but anyway, I was at the stage where I understood what the calls do and stuff, but I was starting to hear these different tags, and you would see them if you looked at modules. They'd have starts in blah blah blah, some little code of a format, and so I asked some of the people about it, some of the guys that were helping me learn, and I said, what is all this stuff? Do I need to learn this? And they said, no, you can ignore all of that. You'll hear two things that you need to know: box 1-4 and 1P2P. And I'm like, okay, what the heck is that? And they go, box 1-4 is the head square through 4 thing. And I'm like, okay. And what's the 1P2P? That's the lead right circle to align thing. Okay, good. And they said, anything else after that, you don't really need to worry about it. And for the most part, that's true.
You're right. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I call those specific formations fixed points, because the square is fixed at that point. It's a fixed point. It's a good place. It's a good place to start your modules from. It's a good place to start your sequencing from. It's a good place to start your chicken plucker. All of those things are going to build from those fixed points. And as you progress, eventually you're going to get outs from a cross the street box or a RBO or whatever you want to call it these days, a head star through pass through box. That becomes another fixed point to you as an individual because you recognize the Fazar state and you know how to fix the square from there. And as you gain an experience, those things build and build and build till you're like Alan, where, you know, every one of the, 864,000 variations that you can have of each dancer mixed up on the floor.
Don't
He
blame
probably
me.
knows them all in his head.
Yeah, I mean, all these little systems and, you know, Fazar and Fazar and all, those are all just shortcuts for callers to say to each other. They're just shortcuts for describing where, you know, where the people are. But the important thing is to know where the people are and, you know, maybe some ways to get them there. And however you know, whatever shortcut conversation you want to have, that's, you know, another whole thing on the side.
It's just like your address. It just tells me where you live, but it doesn't tell me how to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and I want to learn how to get there.
I wish I had actually thought of that, Guido, because that's what the essence of Fazar. I say it's just a starting reference of commonality so that you know where the dancers are to start, so you know everything after that follows from that spot. But that's probably the most perfect analogy. It's like a house address. Tells you where you are, but not how to get there or where to go from there.
And Jolanda?
Here's a spot on a map.
Those colors you were talking about, I know exactly how they feel, because when I learned by myself. I had no color schools, no nothing. I was just playing around with the checkers and moving the dancers around and you know, trying to get it worked out and trying to see some kind of system in there and made it work. And I knew how to get somewhere, but I never knew where I were. In order, what was the name, until I think I was 7 years of calling and doing dances already and the one or the other special dances, and had a club. And then I went to my first color school, and they all were naming names. It was with Don Beck and Al Stevens. And I was far ahead with the calling and controlling, but the heck, I didn't know what they were talking about, the special phaser and all the technical description and stuff like that. I learned that and had to adjust that to my calling. With more and more color schools, I got acquainted, and then with the coaching, of course, then you have to really go into depth and work it out. And I think the point is to get the theoretical parts in, as he said, with the house number where you live in, into how do I get there?
Yes, they need to be integrated.
Right. And whenever
I don't know if anybody's noticed this graphic that I had behind me, but this is square dance callers, caller 1 and caller 2. This is the information, what's going on, all the technical stuff that goes between it, how we're presenting that material. This is what we want to say. This right here, that's Fazar, the smallest part of everything that's in here. That's just the commonality, that one little piece of information that says, now I know where you're starting from. Now the rest of the message can make sense.
Yeah.
It's an address.
Also,
that's all it
barriers
is.
to entry for new callers, just based on the things that I've heard over the last 2 years on on these various Zoom sessions, it seems to me that one of the biggest challenge for people who are going to run caller schools is making is the prerequisites. And because it seems like universally the students come into these schools and they get overwhelmed for a number of reasons. Maybe there's just too much material in the weekend, but right up front, when they when people are using all this terminology and stuff, that's an example of a whole bunch of stuff that sort of ought to be in some prerequisite material, where either they say don't come unless you know the following things, or they give you some kind of a packet to work on ahead of time before you get there. But it seems like a lot of newbies, maybe not even just newbies, walk into these different caller schools and are suddenly hit with right up front with a whole bunch of stuff that is just communication stuff, as opposed to actual material about calling, per se.
Yeah,
And
the newer callers call it the fire hose approach.
well, I
it's
mean, well, there's also a problem, which is
With
that
every single
most
caller
callers-
that ever was a new caller.
right.
yeah.
Well,
Feeding
I
from a
mean,
fire
there's
hose.
also a problem where a lot of caller schools traditionally, for certain reasons, try to pack really just too much material into the school, because they think they have to have comprehensive coverage of a whole bunch of different topics, which are maybe a
Well-
little all too much at once. And so, I mean, there's definitely, you could pick just any one of those things and it's a fire hose, and then you throw them all at them. So I mean, that's another problem, is just too much stuff. But establishing what you're going to need to know on day one before you get there, that seems like that could really go a long ways.
And
Roz,
that's the
were you
trouble
at
with that's the trouble with caller lab coaches. They've got this standard little, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this on your, on your first general class. And of course, there are far too many topics there to be really effectively covered. And so, and you go away with really not enough information on any one topic, let alone, achieve being able to start calling.
Yeah, I don't know.
And
I
they
don't know
require
why
to have 40 hours.
Yeah, Roz, were you at that school that did in Wollongong?
No,
No, okay.
no, I've only
No,
been to one caller school.
No, it was, one of the comments I got on that, and I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Bill Harrison, but it could have been somebody else. But it could have been Ken as well. We took one singing call figure, and that was the entire weekend. And that way everybody had a common focus where to start from, that one singing call figure. And from there, we just expanded out to touch, okay, what's a zero? That takes us from this point in the singing call back to this point in the singing call. How do we structure it? How do we build pattern? It would not have passed the Caller Lab curriculum because it didn't have this topic, here's the explanation. But we covered the range of topics with a common focus that you could walk away, and then you got all this material in the hand. I think the book was something like 120 some odd pages of each one of these topics that you could go, but you could relate it back to that singing call and that aspect that we talked about. And when did that, a couple of the comments I got said, oh, that makes sense now. And I love hearing that when I teach. I wish I got it all the time, but I don't. I'd be lying if I said I did. I understand that now. Oh, that's clear now. I now know what they mean. Because you're right, Caller Lab has a curriculum that you have to follow. If you don't follow it, Caller Lab also has a lot of funding for new callers to attend caller schools and things like that. And a lot of caller schools can get funding, but they have to follow that curriculum.
Yeah, I don't know why I, of all people, was being politic when I said for certain reasons, because of course I meant exactly what you're talking about with the Caller Lab curriculum.
I don't mind saying I've been a member of Caller Lab for a long time. I stopped when I moved over here mainly because I just let it lapse, but I've rejoined Caller Lab. I'm an avid believer in Caller Lab and what it stands for. I don't always agree with Caller Lab, but I'm a believer that if we want to make things better, they are the people that set the standards, and the only way we're going to achieve a standard and make it better is if we get involved and participate in it at one aspect or another. If we don't, then we've got no right to complain about it. And
I really like that idea of
let's fix it.
I really like that idea you said of having just, one small thing like this one singing call, and then deconstructing it. I think that's a great way to, teach things. I don't know if it works for everybody, but I think it's a great approach.
Well, what we did, like I think the singing call figure off the top of my head was head, square through, swing through, boys, run, bend the line, right and left through, flutter wheel, slide through. That was the singing call figure. And then we went to there. Okay, well, let's look at what it does. Okay, what is a zero? Is there a zero in here? Let's break that down. Okay, let's do modules. Use that. Let's focus on, and everybody gets a movement. Like I might say, Alan, okay, you're going to be doing spin the top, and Bob, you're going to be doing flutter wheel, and Yolanda, you're going to be doing Ferris wheel. Okay, and you write a little focus with that. Okay, and you write a corner box and a partner line module. Well, from there, we need to be able to get from a box to a line. Great. Okay, well, that's a corner box. Let's get to a partner line, do a partner line module. We need to go back to a corner box. And now what we've done is we've introduced the magic modules, but still taking us back to our singing call. And some of the stuff that came out at the end of this workshop, or at the end of the school, what I did was I took all the material that the callers had done for their focus modules, their singing calls, the things like that, to modify it. And that became, it was all written material, but that became the dance. And it was a really good dance. There was some really, really good choreography. And then I explained on the next day, that material was the stuff that you guys wrote, new callers, experienced callers. It was what you presented, what you came up with. You know a lot more than you think you do. You just weren't able to sit down and focus it because there's so much information coming to you. But now you had a point of reference to start from.
I think we've got to be careful about criticizing Caller Lab because they do a lot of tremendous things in standardization.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Standardization.
And Mark is still recording this, so you need to keep that in mind too.
Oh,
You hurt somebody's feelings.
I do not, I will never, and you'll find, I will never say anything behind somebody's back that I will not say directly to their face. I will never do that. I love Caller Lab. I'm a very strong supporter, and I'm trying to get Caller Lab to come and present again about what Caller Lab is doing, the various committees, and how to get more involved with it. But that being said, Caller Lab is made up of callers, and callers are people, and callers are sometimes fallible. We're not all infallible.
Yeah, well, nobody here is saying Caller Lab is bad, and I'd use the word,
not at all.
I'd use the word critique more than I would say criticize, because that sounds a little. Yeah.
My best example of Caller Lab is the Applications Review Committee. I've had callers say to me, that's improper because the Applications Review Committee has said that is improper, so it's illegal to call that. And then 2 years later, they reversed their decision. Now, was the decision right or was the decision wrong? Well, given the information they had at the time and the people there, it was the right decision for the right time. Given more information, they revised it and they changed their decision. Now that's a correct process, but the only way to get involved is to be involved in that process. We're just people, and people make mistakes, and sometimes, if you think I'm wrong on something, tell me. Because
are there any officials here from Caller Lab?
Just you, I think.
Yeah, no, just kidding. No, but I think sometimes if you need to make regulations as well, if you see that with the current definition or use, it's being abused, and it's not smooth flow, or it's playing a game on the dancers and trying to show off or whatever, and if it doesn't work, and if I guess it's just like in real life, and if people don't get there with the common sense, then you have to have regulations to make it just how you say it, more feasible.
Absolutely. Caller Lab is a wonderful organization. They have done a lot of really, really good things. The standardization of the programs, a great idea, a great, phenomenal idea. How we applied that standardization was up to the individual callers, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of things have fallen apart over the years, because we got lost in what we were trying to achieve, and that was we got into the calling for callers instead of calling for dancers. That's my opinion, but that was a broad spectrum analysis.
And I mean,
when we got nothing past that, we are on a road to self-destruction. Caller Lab has the means and the mechanisms already in place to deal with a lot of these aspects that we have problems. And I've heard a lot of callers say, well, Yeah, that's the Color Lab curriculum, but I'm going to call the way I want. I get lots of dancers at my dance. My club is happy. They'll call the way I want. And you know, when we're too old to dance, to heck with it, I won't worry about it anymore. That's fine. But what you've done is you've denied your dancers the ability to go and dance anywhere. Because if you want to call heads whoppity splash the ding dong, then invert curly 3 through and across, and your dancers do it great and they have a fine, you're a great caller. But your dancers will never be able to go anywhere else and dance, and nobody will ever be able to come and visit you and dance, because there's no standardization.
And we got to be aware that, you know, talking about Color Lab, it seems like a big mollusk being on top of us and oppressing or whatever. Everybody can be Color Lab, and we all can be a part of, and everybody's dedicating. Just become a member and get into the committees, and you can vote on decisions. You can make suggestions. Everybody can do something and change. Just get involved, you know. It's not like, you know, it's always easy if someone's doing the work and then say, that's not so good, I would like it a little bit more that way, or I pick that, like cherry picking a little bit, you know. You can bring your input in Color Lab in the committees and have them voted. So,
you know, Yolanda was making a comment that was basically, oh, you better watch out, we're being recorded, somebody from Color Lab. Why don't?
No,
why
I
don't
didn't mean it like that. I just wanted you to, you know.
Yolanda, I think it was a perfect comment, because Mickey is one of the executive on Color Lab.
Yes.
I was going to say, anybody who's active on a committee in Color Lab right at the moment, raise your hand, right? And so yeah, so half the people here.
I was trying to get it to a more positive way, and I thought this was a way to do it.
Color Lab is a very positive organization, and you need to get involved. And Mickey, when you're at Color Lab coming up here recently, give Teresa a little bit of a nudge, because I'm trying to get her to come back and talk about Color Lab and a few things. Yes, Ross.
Okay, I will.
Just to relate it, something outside, if you've ever been in the club and had constitutions and then had to try and work out what the constitution meant and tried to sort it out or try and get it perfect, it never really happens. So you can do, all you can do is do your best. So Color Lab does their best in what they can do. And it probably will never be perfect. Nothing else ever is. So
I mean, you always can improve, definitely. And there's always
hate to
things to
disagree
make
with
it
you,
better.
Ross, but my wife said that I'm perfect. Well, she said I'm a perfect idiot, but that's close enough. I prefer to focus on the positive.
no one's perfect.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is after 12. I usually try and knock off about 11, but it is, we're now a few hours in. If you'd like to stay and chat, I can leave the room open, but I'm going to be heading out of here because I need to spend some time with the lady I married. Otherwise, she'll get mad at me. I don't even know if she's still in the house. She may be taking the dog out for a walk. But thank you all very much for coming in. And as always, if you have something that you want to discuss or topics you want to bring up, think about who would be good. I can approach them. Mickey, I look very much forward to your presentation, maximizing the use of rotation and invert and rotate, amongst other things. And I hope you all have a great week.
Just before you go, John, they've got the Fringe on in Victor Harbour, and it's a free one. So if you want to go, it's on at the moment, and it goes till 4.
No, I think I'll steer clear of that. Running our dance Friday night will be good enough for me.
Okay, no worries.